The high priest stood on a high stage, holding and loudly reading the accusation for Abella. No one supported the princess who committed such a serious crime. Lemuria looked with bitterness at her only sister, who was waiting for the guillotine. The sharp blade slowly rose up and then sharply rushed down. The entire scene turned into a sea of blood. A nurse comes into Dean's room and says it's time for the girl to get ready for surgery. The girl closes the unfinished book with a sigh. Jean hopes that after the operation, she will be able to read the last chapter. The nurse is embarrassed, but assures the girl that she will read more than one book. Something went wrong during the operation. Jean sees the fading light and realizes that she will never wake up. In a huge hall, the priests of the magical order call upon their forces. Magic flames surround a girl sitting in the center of the hall. With horror, the girl sees that the flame of the magic ball is gradually dying out. The high priest regretfully says that it is impossible to awaken magical abilities in a girl. A man in luxurious clothes sadly looks at the girl and realizes that he has no choice. The girl anticipates trouble and looks at the man with fear. Suddenly, black magical waves swirl around the girl. The baby is choking in the surrounding darkness. In hope, she reaches out her hand to the man who has turned away and falls into the abyss. Jin opens his eyes in horror and is relieved to realize that this is just a dream. The girl looks around in confusion, but cannot recognize her hospital room. Jean is perplexed and wonders how long the operation took and why the hospital did such a luxurious renovation. Suddenly, the girl notices her hands. They are so small and soft, not at all like the ones worn out by constant injections that she had before the operation. Jean, with great difficulty, gets off the unrealistically huge bed and runs to the mirror standing by the window. In the mirror, the girl sees a little girl with long blonde hair and huge, fiery colored eyes. Jean falls to the floor in shock and watches the reflection, which for some reason repeats her every movement. The scream heard far beyond the room from which it came. Hearing the scream, 3 girls in maid uniforms run into the room and in panic ask what happened to Her Highness. One of the girls feels Jean and says with relief that Her Highness is okay. Jean, in desperation, grabs the maid and, with tears in her eyes, asks who she is. The maid, accustomed to the girl's whims, reveals that she is the only princess of the Reifenstrai Empire, Her Highness Princess Abella. Jean turns over the names and titles she heard in her mind. It all seems surprisingly familiar to her. Suddenly, she realizes that all this is from a half-read book called How to Raise a Princess. And then Jean gradually begins to understand what is happening. She did not wake up from the operation. She was reborn into Princess Abella. Jin sits dejectedly in a chair, trying to figure out how it all happened. For the 100th time, she repeats that she is Princess Reifenstrai. The maids nod in fear. After a while, Jean begins to believe that she has truly been reborn and is now Princess Abella. The girl remembers that according to the plot of the book, the girl was branded a worthless princess. In a world where respect directly depends on the level of magical powers, their absence is considered a shame and is condemned in every possible way. The lack of a magical gift deprived Abella of her rights to Presto, after which she became even more corrupt and tyrannical. All her life, Abella envied and hated the crown princess, her half-sister, Lymeria. In the end, to win the power struggle, she prepared a whole cup of poison. The princess killed her father, ruining her own life with this act. Princess Abella was eventually executed. Jean screams in panic why she was reborn into this vile and worthless heroine. The girl turns to the maid. She shudders in fear. Jean does not understand why the maid is so afraid of her. Suddenly, the servants open the doors in reverence. A handsome man in luxurious clothes enters the room. All the servants fall to their knees. Jean realizes that this is Abella's father and tries to remember everything that was written about him in the book. Emperor Alver is the youngest ruler of the Reifenstrai Empire, ascending to the throne at the age of 19. Having taken the oath to the empire, he immediately raised troops and set off to conquer neighboring empires. In just 10 years, he expanded the territory of Reifenstra several times. Under his rule, the empire achieved unprecedented prosperity. At the same time, the cruel and cold-blooded tyrant had the most beautiful face, like an angel. Looking sternly at the maid, the emperor asks what happened. The maid trembles with fear and answers. The princess suffered because of her carelessness. When asked by her father what the princess's bodyguard was doing at that time, the girl looks away and doesn't know what to say. Suddenly, the man's gaze becomes icy. He orders to answer. The maid trembles and says that a few days ago, Sir Victor angered the princess and is now still healing his wounds. Jean thinks with horror that in the book, Abella's character was simply devilish. The girl remembers the terrible pictures from the book, in which the princess tormented her servants, and understands why, now, all the servants are afraid of her. Suddenly, the emperor turns to his daughter. His gaze frightens the girl very much. She understands that now she will get it because of the behavior of the previous owner of the body. But unexpectedly, the father gently and affectionately strokes his daughter's head and asks what hurts her. In a rage, Altwar turns to the lackeys and asks how some exile dares to provoke the princess, orders him to be brought immediately. Jin watches with interest and fear how quickly and often he changes his facial expression. The chief magician of the empire, summoned by her alarmed father, approaches the girl. The magician asks Jin to stay put, as a stunning blue light begins to sparkle around him. Wonderful waves lift the girl into the air, and she realizes with shock that this is real magic. Jin experiences unusual sensations and gradually sinks back to the floor. The magician reports to the emperor that Her Majesty's health is no longer in danger. Altvar nods with satisfaction and releases the magician. A caring father tells his daughter that he is very glad that everything is okay with her. Jin is perplexed, because in the book Altvar is described as a cold-blooded tyrant. The guards appear with the prisoner and report that His Majesty's order has been carried out. The guards throw the prisoner to the floor. He trembles and tries to get up. Suddenly, the prisoner raises his head and looks straight at the princess, his gaze blazing with hatred. Jin does not understand why he is looking at her like that. The book says that Victor is a prince from the Silently Empire. Because he has black hair and red eyes, everyone considered him an outsider. At the age of 10, Victor was transferred to Reifenstrai as a political hostage. At the age of 12, Victor was sent home because he offended the princess, after which no one saw him. This character appears in the book for only a few chapters, gradually moving into the background of everyone else. Jill is frightened by Victor's gaze and hides behind the emperor. Noticing this, the emperor becomes furious and says that the hostage sent from some tiny state does not dare look at his daughter. The emperor tells Victor that he has failed in his task as the princess's bodyguard, and for this he will pay in blood. Suddenly, Altwar decides with contempt that such a crime can only be washed away by the bloodshed by all the people of the Silently Empire. Jin is shocked. Such a small thing as a glance in her direction could lead to the collapse of an entire empire. Victor bowed his head obediently. He didn't even try to object. Everyone stood silently. No one tried to intercede for the young man. Everyone thought only of themselves. The girl does not understand what kind of world this is, where there is no justice and human rights. Instead of laws, everything is based on power. No one tries to contradict the despotic ruler. Jin understands that if Victor dies because of her, if a war breaks out, then she will become one of these soulless cowards. Suddenly, Jin comes out from behind her father and selflessly declares that Victor is not to blame for anything. She herself was not careful enough, and this has nothing to do with the young man. Victor is stunned. He does not understand why the princess decided to stand up for him. A month later, Jin fully accepted the fact of her rebirth. From now on, she is Princess Abella. The girl looks thoughtfully out the window and thinks that this rebirth is a true gift from God. From the moment of birth until her death, the girl spent most of her time in the hospital. By transforming into Abella, she received the body of a healthy person, which she had dreamed of all her life. A month has passed since the story with Victor. Abella still remembers with trembling how she dared to contradict the tyrant. But her father no longer remembered this situation. Suddenly, the princess notices that the bodyguard is looking at her thoughtfully. With a beaming smile, the girl asks if everything is okay. The young man, looking at her smile, thinks about what new punishment she is preparing for him. Abella is embarrassed looking at the expression on Victor's face, and although she doesn't understand what's wrong, she clearly didn't mean it that way. In the short time spent in this world, the princess realized that the character of the heroine was no different from what was written in the book. Everyone was afraid of her. In the entire palace, there was almost no one willing to even just talk to her. Even her personal maid is afraid of her. The princess was so terrible. Abella decides that it's time to change her opinion about herself and should start with those closest to her. The princess approaches Victor, who is bending his knee, extends his hand, and offers to rise. The girl swears on the name of the imperial princess that she will never again hurt the young man or humiliate her. Victor looks at the princess and wonders what she was up to again in the end. The bodyguard stands up, ignoring the princess's outstretched hand. Suddenly, a voice is heard at the door that it is unacceptable to behave this way with Her Majesty. The young man who entered, the princess's personal butler Nil Tevi, respectfully greeted Her Highness. According to the book, Nil is the only person who remained on Abella's side from the beginning to the very end. While others gradually turned away from the girl, he was always there. Nil was so devoted to the princess that he sacrificed his life for her without regret. Nil hurriedly approaches the princess. He looks at Victor with disdain and obvious hostility. Between the man and the boy, it's like electric discharges jump. Abella wonders with surprise whether their relationship is really that terrible. Approaching the princess, Neil respectfully bends his knee. The butler reports that he returned from his trip empty-handed. Abella reads the documents brought by Neil. It turns out that His Majesty has an illegitimate daughter, her half-sister. The girl remembers that in the book, her sister Lemuria Larwood is the main character. According to the plot, the young emperor created an alliance with a girl from the family of a wealthy merchant, as a result of which a child was born. However, soon after the birth of Lemuria, a misfortune occurred in the merchant's family, and everyone ended up in prison. The young princess disappeared without a trace. The lost princess was sheltered and raised by a family of peasants, but it turned out to be impossible to erase the noble blood of the imperial family. After returning to the palace, Lemuria very quickly became the favorite of all its inhabitants. Even the cold-blooded and tyrannical emperor gave in. His cruelty, which frozen his heart like ice, melted from the warmth emanating from Lemuria. And there were no people who did not like the newly minted princess. Those who plot against the main character usually do not achieve what they want. Abella understands that the one who is usually the first to fall under the distribution was the mistress of the body in which she is now. Initially, the empire was supposed to have one princess, but due to the appearance of Lemuria, Abella fell out of favor. Lemuria was benevolent and gentle, while Abella was headstrong and cruel. The outcome of the plot is obvious. The prince and princess of Lemuria lived happily ever after, and the hypocritical villain Abella, rejected by everyone, died. In the original story, Abella's character was created only to compete with the main character and be jealous that Lemuria took all her father's love for herself. Neil, looking at his mistress, decides that she is very upset and worried about the presence of her sister. But suddenly the princess, with an angelic expression on her face, asks when she will be able to see her sister. Neil is so taken aback by Abella's reaction, he expected a completely different reaction to his message. The butler leans over to the princess and asks if she is angry. Abella thinks to herself that it is impossible to be angry with the main character. She just wants to live her new life in peace. Neil is puzzled and thinks about the princess's words. Suddenly it dawned on the man, and he says that he understood the subtext of the princess's words. Abella looks at Neil's expression and exclaims in horror that that's not what she meant at all. Suddenly, the butler says that they need to start acting as soon as possible. Otherwise, the consequences will not be long in coming. Victor and the maid are sadly silent. No one wants to say out loud what they are thinking. Abella can't understand why everyone has such strange faces. Finally, the princess loses patience and orders him to tell her everything. Victor begins to tell that Abella, as the daughter of the emperor, was entrusted with responsibility for the imperial family from birth. If Abella loses battles one after another, then she will face the same fate as Victor himself. The girl doesn't understand what we're talking about, because Victor didn't do anything wrong. Victor says that from birth, he was not like everyone else. Because of the color of his hair and eyes, he was branded cursed. The title of heir was taken away, and he was expelled to another empire. Abella thinks sadly that even a prince has to suffer because of absurd nonsense, and she will definitely become a disgrace to the empire because she cannot become anyone else without magic. Neil, seeing how upset the princess is, tries to calm her down and says that there is no need to worry. The butler angrily declares that he will never allow something like this to happen. The girl is dejectedly silent, immersed in her thoughts. Neil is holding back with all his strength so as not to kick out Victor, who dared to upset his favorite. Suddenly, the princess calmly and distantly says that she will prepare for this in advance. Looking out the window, Abella realizes that this must be a completely different preparation. Suddenly, the girl realizes that living in a healthy body is very difficult. She thought that enough times she would not need to be subject to constant restrictions. It would be enough to just lead a calm and measured life. But in this place, the law is not perfect, and one tiny mistake can cost your life, as if nothing depends on you. Abella suddenly seemed to wake up. She couldn't just admit defeat. Flipping through the books again and again, Abella thinks that others can easily be reborn as a princess and live without worrying about anything, but she managed to fall into the hands of an evil witch. The girl thinks that even if she cannot control the fate of her unfortunate heroine, she will never come to terms with such an ending. Abella must change her sad fate. The girl behaves very strangely. The servants begin to suspect that the poor princess has gone crazy. Abella holds an incredibly long list in her hands and announces that her rescue plan is ready. According to the plan, she will need to spend a lot of time studying the history of her country. She will need to become an exemplary princess. Once upon a time, The emperor himself hired a teacher for Abella, but at that time the princess was still so small that now the girl must quickly catch up with all the gaps. However, in reality, the past Abella never taught anything at all. The girl thinks that she simply needs a teacher for additional classes, but cannot decide who to choose. The maid Heidi is not suitable. She is too soft, and besides, she is still afraid of Abella. Neil is very smart and has a lot to teach, but he has so many other responsibilities that he hardly finds time to study. Well, of course, only Victor remains. He certainly won't be able to refuse her. Endless classes began, Abella, although she was sometimes unbearably bored, diligently crammed everything. Finally, the strict Victor passed the exam brilliantly. The girl is incredibly happy that her plan is gradually beginning to come true. During all the time she studied with Victor, the princess almost caught up with the original level of knowledge of the former Abella, and in some places she even surpassed it. But despite all the efforts of the little princess, Victor still treats her coldly and somewhat distantly. For etiquette lessons, Neil found the Duchess of Klein, famous for her elegance. The Duchess worked diligently with the girl, touching on all aspects of social life. Now her knowledge of Abella etiquette is quite up to the required level. However, to be a princess, you need to learn many more things. Abella always thought that to be a princess, it was enough for her to be born and drink and eat on time. But in reality, everything turned out to be much more complicated. Neil and the maids enter the room with tea. It's time to take a break. The maids set a luxurious table with all kinds of sweets. Abella, like any little girl, loves sweets. But after a moment, delight gives way to sadness. In a past life, the girl, due to illness, could not eat everything. But when she entered the new world, she was denied nothing, and the consequences in the form of excess weight were not long in coming. From that moment on, Heidi declared a tough war on all sweets. The princess's stomach growls. She looks at the maid and begs to let her eat at least a piece. Heidi cannot resist this look from her ward and says that only today, as an exception, this table was prepared especially for Her Highness. The girl rushes to the maid, hugs her, and says that Heidi is the kindest person in the empire. Abella is delighted. Before, she never imagined that such little things could make her happy. While finishing her tea, the princess notices that Victor is looking thoughtfully out the window, immersed in some thoughts of his own. Abella also looks out the window and sees wonderful kites there. Suddenly, the princess looks at Victor and realizes that, in fact, he is still just a child and just wants to play and forget about all the difficulties of life. Suddenly, the girl claps her hands and says that she is tired. And now they are all going to the garden together. They will play and relax. Victor froze in amazement and did not fully believe the princess's words. Abella turns to Neil and, like a true lady, asks permission. Since the girl needs to change, Victor and Neil are waiting for her at the gate. These two obviously can't stand each other's company. They prefer to turn away and pretend that they are each on their own. Finally, the princess runs out of the castle. She is the very charm in a new dress and with a shining face. Seeing the girl, Victor noticeably blushes. Neil, seeing Victor's reaction, becomes furious. The butler blocks the young man's back and reports to the princess that, on his instructions, the kites for the princess's game are ready. Abella glows with delight. She just wants to be a little girl. The tension between Neil and Victor is growing, as if electricity sparkles between them. The princess flies kites with delight. She has not felt so free and easy for a long time. All the servants are involved in the princess's game. Her snake turns out to be the highest. Suddenly, Abella notices that Victor's kite is rising higher and is ahead of the girl's kite. Seeing such impudence, Neil sharply twists the rope. His kite knocks down Victor's toy. With sarcasm, the butler remarks that if the young man is worse than others, then there is no point in trying to stand out. The men compete for the princess's attention in such a childish way, causing her to laugh cheerfully. Playing further, Abella thinks that the book Neil is cold and insensitive, but in fact, he turned out to be very nice, which means she herself has no right to be weak. Suddenly, the rope on Her Majesty's snake becomes taut and breaks. A strong wind carries the snake to the farthest corner of the garden, directly onto the roof of the gazebo. Abella takes off and runs for her toy. Having made her way through the hedge, the princess looks around, looking for the way to the gazebo. After getting lost a little, Abella runs out onto the lawn, surrounded by beautiful flowers. There is a gazebo right in the center of the lawn. Suddenly, the girl sees that she is not alone on the lawn. Someone is sitting in the center of the gazebo, quietly humming. The princess thinks that her father built this gazebo especially for her, and no one except her and her retinue has the right to come here. And this girl is not familiar to her, although her silhouette seems familiar to her. Suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, Abella is struck by the thought that this is Lymeria Larwood, her half-sister. The princess remembers that, according to the plot of the book, they should meet for dinner in 6 months, but something went wrong. Abella decides that the best strategy is to quietly leave the area, but suddenly she steps on a dry branch and a very loud crash is heard. Lemuria, hearing an extraneous sound, turns around in fear. Abella tries to run away before her sister notices her, but suddenly hears a greeting. Lemuria stands up, makes a deep curtsy, and greets her highness with respect. Abella, in a panic, cannot understand why her sister ended up here and right now. Seeing the strange expression on the princess's face, Lemuria politely asks if she is okay. Having coped with her emotions, Abella joyfully replies that everything is fine. She just doesn't understand how Lemuria got here. The older sister replies that while walking in the park, she noticed that there were the most beautiful flowers on this lawn. Abella understands with annoyance why everyone in the book loved her sister, and if she had not been the main character, they could have become friends. Suddenly, a man's voice is heard from the bushes. He says that the bouquet is beautiful and quite worthy of Her Majesty. Faithful Neil coldly tells Lemuria that this gazebo was built by His Majesty especially for the princess, so all outsiders are prohibited from being here. Victor, who appeared after Neil, rather menacingly asks what Lemuria's intentions were if she arbitrarily invaded the princess's possessions. The girl is very frightened, sincerely asks for forgiveness, admits that she did not know that this was the property of Her Highness. Lemuria says that His Highness allowed her to move freely around the garden, and she decided that she could come here too. Lemuria has not yet been officially introduced, so she cannot call the emperor father. Abella remembers a story in which her sister grew up among peasants. She was subjected to various bullying, and the princess is surprised to realize that she feels very sorry for Lemuria. Suddenly, a familiar voice is heard asking Lemuria what she is doing here. The girls turn around in fright. The emperor himself appears in front of the gazebo, and contrary to usual, he looks quite simple. Heidi runs up to Abella and asks if the princess has found her kite. The girl answers with embarrassment that she was so surprised by the appearance of Lemuria that she completely forgot why she came here. The emperor looks at Lemuria, and his gaze instantly becomes cold and prickly like ice. The girl is scared. Without saying a word to his eldest daughter, he turns away and orders the guards to take Lemuria to her chambers. Taking Abella by the hand, Alwar heads towards the exit, casually telling Lemuria that from now on, he forbids her to appear near the princess without his permission. As she leaves with her father, Abella feels awkward and shy, and she turns around sharply. Lemuria, with tears, sees her father and sister leave and remains completely alone at the gazebo. Abella is studying in her room, yawning from boredom and fatigue. The girl looks at the beautiful flowers in the vase. Lemuria does not give up hope of making friends. Almost immediately after meeting in the garden, she sent the princess this bouquet. A few days later, events begin to develop in accordance with the plot of the book. Abella receives an invitation to the ball. During a dinner party, the emperor must introduce Lemuria. To the cheers of those present, she will be presented as the daughter of the emperor. Abella will be shunned and studiously ignored by the entire society. Because of envy and resentment, she will have to become the one everyone hates. The girl thinks that despite the fact that they met a little earlier than necessary, this will not ruin her plans. The princess is sure that she must change her image in the eyes of other people for the sake of her own future. Only the item about dancing remains unfulfilled on her list. The girl goes out into the garden, looks around in search of someone from her retinue. Noticing Heidi, the princess runs up to her and asks if she has seen Neil. The maid replies that the butler has important business today, and he left without saying when he would return. The girl sadly says that she wanted to practice dancing with Neil before the upcoming ball, but obviously she will have to give up this idea. Heidi thoughtfully replies that if Her Highness wants to practice dancing, then she may well choose someone else to do it. Suddenly, the maid turns around, calls Victor, and waves her hand to him. Victor feels a chill run down his spine. For some reason, he doesn't expect anything good. The other dance partner Heidi was talking about turned out to be Victor. Abella appreciated the maid's idea because Victor once belonged to the imperial family, which means he could very well teach her how to dance. The princess is a little embarrassed by the presence of the young man, but Victor boldly approaches and offers to start the lesson. The young man holds out his hands to the girl and, according to the rules of etiquette, says that he has the honor to invite her to dance. Having started to dance, the girl happily notices that dancing in this world is very similar to the waltz from her real world. Abella recalls that in her world, she danced the waltz very well, so even now she should not have problems with dancing. The girl notices that, in fact, Victor is not inferior in attractiveness to other male characters. Continuing to dance, The princess wonders why this young man was given only a couple of chapters in the book. The princess is so carried away by her thoughts that at some point she stumbles and begins to fall. At the last moment, Victor catches her. Abella continues her reasoning and steps on the young man's foot, embarrassed that Victor might notice her absent-mindedness. Suddenly, Neil enters the room and asks why Her Majesty didn't wait for her faithful butler to train. The girl answers without hesitation that Victor is also a very good teacher. Suddenly, the bodyguard lets go of Abella's hand, bows, and asks permission to leave since Mr. Neil has returned. The princess watches this scene in bewilderment, which no longer pleases her at all. And then, the day of the ball comes. The carriages arrive at the castle, one after another. The most noble people of the empire arrive one after another. Victor, in full dress uniform, stands thoughtfully at the door of Abella's chambers. Suddenly, images of a beautiful and happy princess flash through the young man's head. He remembers how they danced before the ball. Victor forcefully turns his head from side to side, trying to drive away the obsessive images. Meanwhile, Abella sleeps sweetly in her chambers and has no intention of waking up. Opening her eyes, she notices how great the weather is outside the window and decides that it is best to sleep under such sun. The door swings open and Neil enters, having learned from the maids that the princess has not even gotten up yet. The butler mercilessly wakes up the princess, looks at his watch, and notices that if they don't start getting ready right away, they risk being late. With a wave of his hand, Neil calls the maids and orders them to start getting ready. A trio of maids, led by Heidi, advance towards the bed, leaving Abella no chance of escape. Suddenly, the cry of the princess is heard throughout the surrounding area. She calls Victor and begs him to save her. The excited bodyguard rushes to the door to help his little mistress. Heidi blocks his way and explains with a smile that the princess is just a little capricious from fear of the upcoming event. Suddenly, Victor hears someone calling out to him behind him. Turning around, the young man and the maid can't believe their eyes. She definitely shouldn't be here. Before Victor and Heidi stands the beautiful and shining Lemuria, completely ready for the ball. The servants bow down and politely greet the princess's elder sister. Lemuria reports that she saw a familiar silhouette from afar, but did not expect that it was Victor who would be here. The girl presses herself close to Victor and gently asks why he is here. Because Abella probably really needs him. The young man, in fright, jumps away from the girl at a considerable distance. Victor notes that if Lemuria passes here, it means she has some business. The girl begins to tell what her father told her, but then the footman abruptly interrupts her. The girl falls silent in embarrassment and suddenly says that she has to take her leave. Lemuria and the footman quickly turn around and leave. Victor and Heidi look after them in confusion. The girl confidently says that the eldest princess came here specifically for Victor. In the meantime, the princess's preparations are almost finished. All that remains is to tighten the corset a little, and the little lady will be ready. Heidi and Victor enter the room and look at Abella with delight. The little princess is simply magnificent. Every last detail in her appearance is carefully thought out. The girl looks like an angel. Heidi is proud of her work and the work of the maids. She exclaims with delight that Her Majesty is simply a goddess. Suddenly, Abella turns to Victor and asks if he likes her image. The young man is silent for a long time, blinded by the beauty of the princess. Then he comes to his senses and coolly replies that it is very beautiful. Abella, like a true princess, loves praise very much, so she turns to Neil and now asks his opinion. Neil looks at the princess carefully and says with satisfaction that it looks very similar and falls silent. Neil didn't want to say out loud, but now the little princess looks amazingly like her mother. The butler looks at his watch and decisively says that it is time for them to move out. Abella cannot be fooled so easily. She remembered that Neil interrupted himself mid-sentence and wondered what that meant. But now, the most important thing is the ball. The girl will definitely figure out everything else later. Finally, the princess and her entire retinue leave the chambers and head towards the ballroom. At the entrance to the throne room, a footman announces that Duke Vado has arrived. A tall, handsome young man enters the hall, and with a confident gait, approaches the ladies standing nearby. The ladies greet the Duke and notice that they have not seen him in society for a long time. One of the ladies says that according to rumors, the princess, left outside the walls of the palace, has finally returned. The Duke is surprised by the news. He is not aware of recent events. The ladies say that immediately after returning, the princess was locked in the palace, and the youngest princess also did not appear in public all this time. The Duke is completely confused. He is completely unaware of events. A young girl with green eyes says that the youngest princess is so useless that she can't even stand up for herself, covering herself with a fan from prying ears. The girl says that the real reason for the banquet is precisely the performance of the eldest princess. The Duke notes that perhaps the rumors are true, but perhaps not. Suddenly, the footman snaps to attention and announces that His Majesty and Her Highness have arrived. Everyone in the hall instantly fell silent, turned to the doors, and froze in anticipation. His Majesty Altfer Larwood and Her Majesty Abella Larwood enter the hall. The little princess is completely unrecognizable. From a capricious, spoiled child, she gradually begins to turn into a beautiful lady. The entire community bows respectfully and greets their great emperor and his daughter. Father and daughter slowly and proudly walk through the entire hall to the thrones installed on the pedestal. Suddenly, a hubbub begins behind the emperor's back. Young girls and boys whisper to each other, lively, discussing what is happening. The emperor turns around sharply. He is angry at such impudence. He showers the gossipers with his famous icy gaze. All conversations immediately calm down. Abella looks at her father and thinks that this is why he is the ruler of the empire that dominates the mainland. Because with just one glance, he is able to terrify anyone. Noticing that his daughter is nervous, he gently squeezes her hand and gently advises her not to pay any attention to them. Abella is flattered by his care and tenderness. The girl remembers that in the book, her father is described as a cold-blooded tyrant, but he was always very affectionate with her. Until his death, the father never hated his daughter. Walking hand in hand with her father, the girl thinks about why the bookish Abella did not spare her father, because he is so good. The emperor and the princess approach the pedestal on which the thrones stand, and then Abella notices that there are 3 of them. Sitting on his throne, Alwer announces that before the celebration begins, he wants to announce one event. The emperor points his hand to the girl standing to the side and announces that Princess Lemuria Larwood has returned to the palace. Presented to everyone, the princess immediately attracts all eyes. She is truly charming. The musicians started playing music, and the gala evening began. And Princess Abella sits alone and longingly watches how quickly her sister charms everyone around. The girl was also not averse to going down to the hall and trying to make friends with someone, but she was ordered by her father to sit here and not communicate with these people. Princess Lemuria continues to captivate the community, with light-hearted chatter and laughter all around her. The former Princess Abella firmly cemented her reputation as a willful, cruel, and capricious monster. Out of hopelessness and despair, the girl begins to tremble with chills. The sensitive father notices that Abella is upset and asks what happened. The girl, having pulled herself together, says with a joyful smile that everything is fine. Suddenly, a footman approaches the emperor and tells him some news in his ear. The ruler's face darkened with terrible anger caused by the news. The father approaches Abella, gently puts his hand on her head, and tells her that he will return soon, and she should wait for him here. As soon as the emperor has left, Abella jumps from the throne. This is the perfect chance to put her plan into action. Making her way through the hall, the girl looks around in search of suitable company. At this time, Lemuria notices empty thrones. Neither her father nor Abella is anywhere. The younger princess notices a small group of young girls, quite pleasant to look at, and rushes towards them. According to all the rules of etiquette, Abella politely wishes the girls good evening, but looking up, she notices that the girls have disappeared. So quickly that the girl didn't even notice it. Abella is lost. She finds herself in this world. It doesn't matter whether she is a princess or not. Since there is no magic, she will be treated like an infectious patient. The girl angrily thinks that it is not at all surprising that the former owner of the body has become such a villain. With gloomy determination, Abella decides that she doesn't care. If she can't make contacts, then it's time to move on to dancing. She urgently needs to find a partner. Suddenly, behind one of the columns, the girl notices a familiar face. Handsome Victor stands silently, not paying attention to anyone. Abella jumps for joy. Victor will be her dance partner, because they danced so well with each other. Victor, noticing the princess out of the corner of his eye, turns sharply and quickly leaves. But the girl, with enviable persistence, catches up with him and calls out to him. The young man realizes with annoyance that he has been caught. Abella curtsies and invites Victor to dance. The girl is afraid that the guy will refuse her. She looks at him with such despair and pleading that the young man's heart trembles. Victor, in the center of the hall, quite a lot of couples are spinning in a beautiful dance. The young couple takes their place in the center of the hall. The training was not in vain. Abella and Victor are so accustomed to each other that their dance resembles a beautiful flight. Abella and Victor are so dizzy that they don't notice anyone or anything around them. They're just enjoying the dance. Evil gossip tongues sarcastically note that the princess was frightened by the arrival of her older sister and decided to become a good girl. Not far from the heroes, Lemuria is dancing together with an unfamiliar young man. The same gossips notice that the eldest princess arrived not long ago, but her dancing skills are simply excellent. An unspoken rivalry begins between the two couples. Suddenly, Abella asks how Victor ended up here. The young man admits that he was sent here by Neil to guard the princess. The young man ironically recalls how Neil warned him not to let his hands go, otherwise this banquet would be the most terrible in his life. The princess admits to her guard that she is very pleased with his presence, and that the implementation of his plan is going well. Suddenly, the girl notices Lemuria dancing not far from them. Abella begins to panic, comparing herself to her sister and saying that she needs to try harder. Victor wholeheartedly wants to reassure the princess and says that Her Highness should not compare herself with others. Suddenly, Victor shields Abella, and the girl feels someone crashing into him. In front of the amazed audience, the girl sees Lemuria sitting on the floor next to her. Victor hugs Abella and looks towards the eldest princess with cold indifference. Her dance partner runs up to Lemuria and asks if she hurt herself. Suddenly, Victor coldly says to Lemuria that Her Highness should be careful next time so as not to fall. Lemuria looks up at him with tears in her eyes and tries to justify herself, but the young man interrupts his older sister and declares that a little longer and Princess Abella could have suffered. A crowd of courtiers immediately begins to discuss the incident, wondering whether Lemuria did it on purpose or Abella. Suddenly, Abella breaks away from Victor's arms, runs up to Lemuria, extends her hand to help her get up, and gently asks if everything is okay with her sister. But unexpectedly, Lemuria's partner rudely pushes Abella's hand away. The young man boldly advises Abella not to pretend, because if she had not moved away, Princess Lemuria would not have fallen. Victor runs up and covers Abella with himself. The young men stand opposite each other, and things are clearly heading towards a fight. Suddenly, the angry voice of the emperor is heard, asking what happened. Victor, the emperor, looks coldly at his eldest daughter and asks if this is so. Lemuria, in a submissive and gentle voice, tremblingly admits that she was the one who was careless. The younger sister had nothing to do with it. Abella watches the emperors in amazement. She did not expect that her older sister would turn out to be such a suck-up and would do everything to make her father believe her. Contrary to the fears of the youngest daughter, Alvar looks at the eldest with disappointment and says that if she doesn't know how to dance, then she shouldn't dance at all. Suddenly, the emperor turns towards Victor and says that this is the second time he has failed to protect the princess. Alvar motions to the servant to give orders regarding Victor's fate. But then, a frightened Abella runs up to her father. The girl passionately convinces her father that if Victor had not shielded her in time, she would have suffered too. To protect her guard, the girl is ready to do anything, even pretend to panic and look pleadingly at her father. Abella looks so touchingly, trembling inside with fear that her idea of being a good girl will fail ingloriously. The father's heart trembles. He takes Abella in his arms, ordering the others to continue the banquet. Duke Vito, standing a little to the side, thoughtfully watches this whole scene. Having brought Abella to rest, her father gently strokes her cheek and carefully asks if everything is all right with her. The emperor thoughtfully tells his daughter that next time, if she doesn't feel like going to such an event, she doesn't have to go. Abella is delighted that her father is the man who is truly ready to protect her from any adversity. The princess and the emperor drink tea cheerfully and casually, enjoying communication with each other. There is a knock on the door. The footman reports that Duke Vito asks for an audience. Suddenly, the emperor's expression changes, and he looks at the door with hostility. The father turns to the princess and asks if she wants to let the duke in. Abella recalls that according to the plot of the book, Duke Vito emerged as the main winner, and it was thanks to him that Lemuria and her lover ascended the throne. The girl thinks that the duke clearly has some plans. She wouldn't want to meet him now. The princess looks piercingly at her father, hinting that she does not want to interrupt such a wonderful evening that they are spending together. The emperor tells the footman that the princess is not feeling very well. She needs peace. There will be no audience today. Let the duke return to his place. The duke stands outside the door with Lemuria. They heard the emperor's entire conversation. The man replies that in that case, they will come another time. Lemuria drooped. She so wanted to spend at least a little time in her father's company. A few days later, Abella learns that her father ordered a tea party because he learned that the princess liked socializing with other girls. The girl is confused. So as not to upset her father, she told him that she has no problems in communication, and now she will have to accept everyone who is afraid of her and does not love her. The girl is not discouraged. She decided that this is another chance to try to establish communication and a chance to change public opinion about her. Finding herself in a noisy and bright market, the princess feels unusually inspired because she practically never leaves the castle. The girl is a little ashamed that she came up with an excuse to buy gifts for the tea party. Otherwise, her father would not have let her go to the city. Initially, the father himself wanted to accompany his daughter, but a suddenly arriving visitor disrupted his plans. Alvar tells the princess that he will not be able to go with her, but Neil and Victor will accompany her. While walking through the market, Neil invites the princess to look at the precious stones. The princess is amazed by the beauty of the decorations and says that they are perfect for a party gift. Neil tells the seller to pack all the goods. The princess is indignant. She did not want to buy everything at once. Why buy all the jewelry when you can choose one at a time? Suddenly, Victor's voice is heard from behind, who also orders all the goods to be packed. Immediately, Neil tells the princess not to worry. He has agreed with the sellers. All purchases will be immediately sent to the palace. Victor immediately comes up and says that he has also resolved this issue. Neil and Victor again begin to compete and heat up the situation. The princess is on the verge of an explosion. Suddenly, Abella screams loudly that she's had enough. This is not how she wanted to choose gifts. Without allowing her companions to come to their senses, she takes off from her place and runs wherever her eyes look. After a while, the out-of-breath princess stops to catch her breath, realizing that she was able to break away from Neil and Victor. Suddenly, someone hands her a handkerchief to wipe away the sweat and carefully asks how she is. Abella looks up and sees a young man in front of her in strange but beautiful clothes. A stunningly handsome young man stands in front of the princess and continues to hand her a scarf. The girl has her head in the clouds, looks at the boy's face, and cannot concentrate on what he is saying. She looks at the young man, cannot take her eyes off him, and thinks about how stunningly handsome he is. Abella remembers Victor, her father Neil. They are certainly handsome, but this young man is not like them. A piercing thought comes to the girl's head. He must be the angel everyone is talking about. Finally, the princess came to her senses, took the handkerchief, and replied that she was fine. Abella looks thoughtfully at the stranger and tries to understand who he reminds her of. Suddenly, it dawns on the girl that the young man is very similar to the priest from the book. The princess was dumbfounded. Could it really be him? Abella politely thanks the stranger for the scarf, promises to wash it and return it to the owner. The young man points his hand towards one of the houses and says that he lives here and the girl can find him at any time. Abella looks towards the house that the guy is pointing at and notices a sign above the entrance that says that there is a room for fortune-telling. The girl is amazed that the young man is really engaged in fortune-telling and prediction. The young man explains that he actually studies astrology. In addition, he observes the location of the stars, and of course knows how to guess a little. The young man sees that the girl is interested and offers to come in and try to tell fortunes. Abella and the stranger enter a dark room filled with very strange objects. The young man says that he works here alone, so no one will disturb them. The young man takes out a beautiful iridescent magic ball and notices that the girl never said her name. The girl decided not to say that she was an imperial princess. She simply said that her name was Abella. Suddenly, the magic ball blinds with an incredibly bright glow. A loud crack is heard and the ball breaks into pieces. The girl, frightened, asks the stranger what this means. Looking at the fragments, the princess thinks that apparently her predecessor did something so terrible that the crystal ball could not stand it and broke into pieces. The young man thoughtfully examines the bursting magic ball. Suddenly, a stranger approaches Abella and cheerfully says that she is very interesting. The girl is perplexed. Such frightening things are happening, and the guy says that she is interesting. What could this mean? The stranger explains that the crystal ball broke because someone imposed a ban, and he cannot tell her fortune. To the princess's perplexed questions, the guy replies that he doesn't know who could have imposed such a ban, but perhaps it was created to protect her. The girl is upset. She just wanted to tell fortunes for fun and didn't even realize that everything would go so wrong, and she would find out about the strange ban imposed on her. Suddenly, the young man suddenly approaches the princess, looking at her intently. The stranger mysteriously reports that the ban imposed on her looks very familiar. The young man reaches out his hand to the girl's face. Abella gets very scared and calls for help. At this moment, Victor bursts into the room and, in a voice cold with rage, orders the stranger to take his dirty hands off the girl. The girl runs up to her guard with joy and relief. She is very happy to see him. Victor asks Abella for forgiveness for once again failing to protect her. The princess interrupts the young man, convinces him that he is not to blame for anything. She herself succumbed to emotions and therefore ran away. On the one hand, the girl is ashamed of her escape, but on the other hand, if she had not escaped, she would not have known anything about the mysterious ban. Victor covers Abella with himself and angrily asks who this man in front of them is. The stranger explains that he is an ordinary astrologer who sometimes tells fortunes, and they are in his house, so the young man should behave less aggressively. After everything that happened, The princess thinks that it is hardly possible to call the stranger an ordinary astrologer. Victor bows respectfully, asks for forgiveness for the intrusion. Thanks for taking care of his lady. The stranger sincerely regrets that he frightened the little lady with some of his actions. As a sign of his sincere apology, the young man hands the girl a box with a gift for her. The box contains a wonderful necklace. Abella resolutely pushes away the box with the necklace and says that there is no need for this. The young people turn around and leave the strange house. The stranger mysteriously looks after them and notices that Abella refused the gift in vain. It will be very useful to her. Walking out onto a noisy street, Victor suddenly falls to his knees, says that he has made an unforgivable mistake, and asks the princess to punish him. Abella assures him that he is not to blame for anything, and if he had not come on time, there is no telling how everything could have ended. The princess realizes that now she can't think about anything except this strange meeting. She tries to understand what the stranger meant when he said that this magic was familiar to him. Neil runs up out of breath and bombards the girl with questions about whether everything is okay with her and where she has been. Abella is very ashamed. Without thinking about the consequences, she made the people most devoted to her worry so much. Neil says that there are enough adventures and experiences for today. It's time to return to the palace. The princess embarrassedly says that since all the gifts have been bought, we can return home. Abella turns towards the astrologer's house and is surprised to think that she feels disappointed in not receiving answers to her questions. The girl is very tired during the day and, having finished all the preparations for tomorrow's tea party, goes to bed. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, a strange, glowing silhouette appears above Abella's bed. The girl wakes up and sees in front of her what appears to be the ghost of a young woman. The woman is incredibly beautiful and looks closely at the princess. Suddenly, the spirit reaches out its hand to Abella. The girl gets scared, jumps back sharply, and falls off the bed. Rubbing her bruised head, the princess tries to understand who this woman is and how she got into her room. The woman with the deep seal looks at Abella, realizing that she did not recognize her. Suddenly, the spirit gently touches the girl's cheek with her hand. Suddenly, the woman begins to move away. Abella feels some inexplicable sadness and reaches out to the woman. The girl tries to reach the spirit, asks her to wait, but the woman gradually disappears. Suddenly, the door opens slightly, and Neil enters the princess's chambers. The butler says that he heard a voice when he walked past Her Highness's door and decided to go in to find out why the princess was still awake. Seeing that the princess is frightened by something, Neil says that he will stand guard at the princess's door until the morning, in case she needs him. In the morning, the princess can't wake up. Heidi asks why the girl didn't go to bed earlier, before the important event. Abella replies that she just couldn't fall asleep for a long time. The girl turns to Neil and is perplexed, because he too did not sleep all night, guarding the princess, but he is full of strength and energy. One of the maids comes into the chambers and announces that everything is ready for tea and we can begin. At the tea party, everything does not go according to plan. The princess sits alone, and the girls who came at the opposite end of the table surround Lymeria. Abella is upset and thinks that everything done at the ball had no effect. Suddenly, a chair moves out next to Abella, and an unfamiliar girl asks permission to take this place. The princess happily invites the girl to sit down. At the other end of the table, everyone suddenly becomes silent and looks in Abella's direction. The princess asks her interlocutor in a whisper why she doesn't avoid her. To the surprise of the girl, the princess replies that she has a very bad reputation for being capricious, but in reality, she is not like that. Abella sadly says that, among other things, she is completely devoid of magical powers. The girl sincerely looks at the princess and says that for her personally, this does not matter at all. The girls spend their time having a pleasant conversation with sincere sympathy and friendliness. Suddenly, Lymeria claps her hands and says that since the last guest has arrived, the tea party can begin. Abella is perplexed. Since this is her tea party, why Lymeria is acting as if she is the hostess of the event? The princess does not intend to let her get away with this. Abella motions to Heidi and tells her to start handing out the gifts. Maids approach the table, carrying elegantly packaged boxes of gifts in their hands. The girls look at the princess in bewilderment. She explains that these are gifts that were prepared especially for tea drinking. The girls look at each other. No one touches the boxes. An awkward pause hangs over the table. Abella fears that if the girls do not accept her gifts, it will be a complete failure. Suddenly, her interlocutor begins to shake the box with interest, wondering what's inside. Abella explains that since Blair is the daughter of General Aztec and has been trained in martial arts since childhood, this whip would be an excellent gift for her. The girls at the other end of the table start laughing at such a gift, and say that the princess has no manners at all. Blair proudly reports that she really likes this gift and sincerely thanks the princess. The other girls, casting aside doubts, begin to open the boxes with curiosity and understand with delight how Abella pleased each of them. The princess is glad that her idea was a success. Her efforts to study each guest were not in vain. Lymeria is in no hurry to participate in the general holiday of gifts. She never opened her box. To avoid appearing rude, the older sister communicates her belief that her dear sister's gift is certainly wonderful. One of the girls enthusiastically clutches to her chest a book that she has long dreamed of, but could not get it anywhere. Abella observes the girls and notes that when they stop acting arrogant, they are quite nice and elegant. The princess is proud of herself. She did a great job and still managed to reduce her suspicions. Suddenly, one of the girls turns awkwardly, touches a mug of tea, and it tips over onto the tablecloth. Abella calls Heidi and asks her to check if everything is okay with Lady Wilfred. Miss Wilfred is scared and upset and apologizes for almost ruining the tea party. Abella laughs and replies that this is complete nonsense. The main thing is that the girl herself was not harmed. Suddenly, Miss Wilfred asks if Her Highness has read the book given to her. Abella is embarrassed, but admits that she has not read this book yet. Suddenly, Blair interrupts the other guest and says that it is not proper to ask such questions. Her Highness is only 12 years old, and her education is just beginning. Another guest chimes in, agreeing that this book is indeed very difficult to study. Abella beams. For the first time, someone outside her retinue comes to her side and to her defense. Miss Wilfred apologizes for her impudence. Abella assures her that everything is fine, and it really won't hurt her to study more. Suddenly, the guest declares with delight that Her Majesty is actually very sweet. The princess simply glows with delight. The guests vying with each other begin to brag about their successes. One of them proudly reports that her younger sister has already studied books whose names Abella has not even heard of. The princess thinks that all this time she has been intensively studying etiquette and has completely abandoned the books that the girls are now talking about with such delight. Abella is afraid that if she admits that she hasn't read these books, it will be tantamount to accepting the title of a useless princess. But if she lies and it comes out, her entire reputation will go down the drain. Suddenly, Lymeria says that her little sister has long and successfully studied all these books. Abella is perplexed. Since when did the main character come to her defense? Lymeria, meanwhile, continues that the princess's teacher praised Her Highness as the most diligent student. One of the girls asks what progress Lymeria herself has made in studying such complex material. The eldest princess answers with embarrassment that, unfortunately, she is not as smart as Abella, but she is also trying to keep up. A few days after the tea party, Abella takes up her studies with triple zeal. She regrets that she has been focusing on dancing and etiquette and has completely forgotten that being a princess is about more than just having manners and looks. The princess realizes with shame that Lymeria, being outside the palace, knows how to support any topic and carry on a conversation, but she can only watch from the sidelines. Abella asks Neil to bring her all the higher-level materials. The more, the better. Neil fears that such materials will be too difficult for Her Highness, but Abella passionately declares that she must become the perfect princess. The girl thoughtfully reflects that only by learning everything a princess should know and getting rid of the stigma of being worthless will she officially become a princess worthy of this empire. Abella is determined to take fate into her own hands. Neil calls the princess, sitting under a tree with another book in her hands, and says that it's time for her to go. In the 2 years since the recent events, Princess Abella has grown from a charming little girl into a beautiful young lady. At the ball dedicated to Abella's 14th birthday, the invited girls discuss that recently the princess has been so busy with her studies that no one has seen her for a long time. At the entrance, a footman announces that the imperial family is arriving. His Majesty Altver Larwood, Her Majesty Abella Larwood, Her Majesty Lymeria Larwood have arrived. The emperor announces that the ball is dedicated to the princess's birthday, and announces the beginning of the celebration. The father approaches his daughter and carefully wishes her to have fun. Lymeria bows in respect to her father and says that she will take care of her sister. Abella is surrounded by attention. All the young people of the society are eager to greet the princess and report on the gifts sent. The girl enjoys an abundance of attention and compliments because she has spent so long and diligently gaining her reputation. The elder sister approaches the princess and says that the orchestra is about to start playing, and Abella promised her the first dance. Music begins to play, and two beautiful girls begin to dance. Duke Veto watches the girls very thoughtfully and mysteriously. While dancing, Abella notices that there are at least 6 people at the ball who want to dance with her. The girls happily discuss that by deciding to dance with each other, they cleverly got rid of annoying fans. After Lymeria helped Abella avoid embarrassment at the tea party, the girls became very close. The eldest princess turned out to be much smarter than she wanted to seem, and gladly helped her sister with her studies. The dance is over. The princesses bow to each other with pleasure. Suddenly, Duke Theato approaches the girls, greets the princesses, and introduces himself. Abella remembers the plot of the book. Duke Theato is the emperor's younger brother. Gentle, elegant, and polite, he helped the main characters of the book more than once. The duke saw how Abella tried to poison the emperor and immediately sent her to the guillotine. Noticing how Abella flinched, her uncle politely asked if everything was okay with her. Suddenly, Abella remembers that, among other things, it was the duke who returned Lymeria to the palace. The eldest princess thanks the duke for the book he sent her, but fears that it will be too difficult for her. Vito replies that the princess underestimates her intelligence. There's just no need to rush, and she'll figure everything out. The duke and Lymeria are having a carefree conversation, and it seems to Abella that they are speaking as if in a peculiar language, accessible only to them. The duke bows, wishes the youngest princess a good birthday, and says that he no longer wants to distract the princesses. Turning around, the uncle tells Abella that his gift has already been delivered to Her Highness's room, and hopes that the princess will appreciate it. In the dead of night, Abella falls exhausted onto her bed. Finally, this long day is over. Neil comes in and says that the gifts for the princess are not yet unpacked. Abella asks the butler to call Victor and Heidi to help her unpack the boxes. The girl and her assistants open the gifts and, checking the list, see who they came from. From one of their boxes, Abella takes out a large shining stone. Victor says that this stone belongs to the temple and is called the Holy Stone. Neil is surprised to announce that the gift was received from Duke Vieto. The girl looks at the stone in amazement and wonders what the Duke wanted to say by giving it to her. Neil says that when the Duke brought Lymeria to the castle, the Emperor wanted to reward him, but his brother asked for the Holy Stone, but did not think that His Majesty would give it up so easily. Abella asks Heidi to put the stone in the drawer. She will deal with all this later. In the morning, the princess sits down to write grateful responses to the gifts received. Suddenly, Abella notices an unusual glow coming from her desk drawer. The girl opens the box and sees that the Holy Stone, donated by the Duke, shines and shimmers. Immediately, as if in response to the call of the stone, something begins to shine on the shelf behind the books. The princess goes to the closet, pulls out books, and sees a strange depression in the wall, exactly the size of a stone. Obeying some vague instinct, Abella inserts the stone into the niche. Clicking slightly, it fits perfectly into place. The stone begins to shine brighter. The light blinds the princess. She hears a strange noise and feels the floor begin to tremble under her feet. Opening her eyes, the girl sees that instead of a solid wall, a passage has opened, and steps leading down are visible. Without listening to the voice of reason, the girl begins to go down the secret passage. Going downstairs, Abella sees large carved doors in front of her. The girl approaches the door, runs her hand over the intricate design carved on the wood, and realizes that this place seems strangely familiar to her. Somewhere she has already seen it before. Suddenly, the doors begin to open, and a bright light falls on the girl. Abella enters a strange room, most of which is occupied by books. On the table, she picks up one publication and is surprised to notice that this book is related to the study of holy power. According to the book, most people in this world are born with either magic or holy power, which is much weaker and much rarer. Due to their origins, royals usually have extremely powerful magical abilities. But among common people, there are also people with magical or holy powers. Those who have magical abilities are called magicians and warriors. Those imbued with holy powers must undergo training and testing to become servants of the temple. The girl looks up from the book and thinks that most of the texts here relate to religious studies, so this place may be connected with the temple. Suddenly, Abella notices a large gemstone on the table in a special stand. The princess, enchanted, takes the stone in her hands, and suddenly it begins to light up with a magical light. Suddenly, the spirit of the woman she already saw 2 years ago appears from the stone. The woman calls the princess by name. Abella is suddenly struck by a realization that this is not just a spirit. This is the spirit of her mother. The woman affectionately strokes the princess's face and congratulates her on her upcoming birthday. The girl tries to touch her mother, but the spirit that appears is incorporeal. The spirit asks the princess not to be sad. She regrets that she personally could not watch the princess grow up. The mother says that the girl had to find this place after she turned 14 years old. The woman gestures around the room and notices that Abella must have had a lot of questions and it's time to get answers to them. Before going to bed, Heidi combs the princess's hair and notices how quiet and thoughtful she is. The maid asks you to tell her what is upsetting the princess. She will do everything possible to ease the burden. Abella replies that she is just tired, so Heidi puts her to bed and wishes her pleasant dreams. As soon as the door closed behind the maid, the girl takes out from under the bed a book she received from her mother and a lantern. This is Saint Natalia was a servant of the temple, waiting for Abella. Even then, she felt her incredible magical power and vague traces of holy power. Looking into the future, Natalia realized that she would not be able to be with her daughter. She saw that the girl would become the only owner of two powers in the world. The woman knew that this power would bring many dangers to the princess, so she left the books and treasures in the secret room. On her 14th birthday, the girl had to find and open this door. And now, following her mother's promptings, the girl must master her power and protect herself. Her mother told Abella that she sealed her powers to protect her. It's not that Abella doesn't have magical powers, but that they were sealed. The girl remembers the mysterious astrologer. He told her the same thing. The girl cannot believe what is happening. Instead of having no strength, she has two at once. Abella goes to bed, deciding that there is a time for everything. In the holy temple, a priest stands in front of the statue of the supreme goddess. The envoy approaching from behind kneels. The priest pronounces only one order: not to disappoint the master. A mysterious stranger who practices astrology says he will do whatever is necessary. Abella spent the days that had passed since meeting her mother, searching for a way to remove the seal from herself, but her search was unsuccessful. At breakfast, the princess looks upset. The emperor carefully asks what happened to her. Abella is not yet going to let anyone in on her secrets, so she cheerfully tells her father that everything is fine. She just didn't sleep well last night. After finishing breakfast, the father announces that tomorrow his daughters are going to the Imperial Academy. Abella is surprised how quickly and imperceptibly time flies. Turning to Lemuria, the emperor announces that she, as the eldest daughter, must take care of her younger sister. The girl assures that everything will be fine. Patting Abella on the head, her father says that she should rest a little and then ask Neil to help her pack her things. Sitting on the bed, Abella watches as Neil and Heidi, horrified that their pet is leaving the castle, go crazy packing her suitcases. The girl tries to protest that she has no use for so many things, but the faithful servants do not pay the slightest attention to her. They must do everything so that their mistress does not need anything. Abella turns to Victor and asks hopefully if he will accompany her to the academy as a bodyguard. Bowing respectfully, Victor replies that His Majesty ordered him to ensure the safety of the princess. The girl looks around in surprise and asks where his luggage is. The young man proudly takes the sword out of its sheath and says that this is the only thing he needs. Abella recounts her suitcases in confusion, and before Neil and Heidi come up with something else, she says that it's time to take care of Victor's luggage. Victor is puzzled. The princess has again cleverly outwitted him. Neil, as always, arrogantly and contemptuously remarks that Her Highness should not bother herself with such trifles. Abella happily replies that she is a princess, and it is her responsibility to take care of her surroundings. In the morning, everyone gathers in the hall. Abella doesn't understand why they still haven't set off on their journey. Lymeria explains that the temple has decided to bless the princess's journey, so everyone is standing and waiting for them. A footman at the entrance announces that temple envoys have arrived. Young men in luxurious flowing cloaks enter the room. The envoys bow and greet the descendants of the sun to the glory of the empire. The entire imperial family, including the ruler himself, bows their heads respectfully before the envoys. The leader of the messengers, Bishop Winston, says that a long time has passed since he last saw the princesses. Abella looks thoughtfully at the bishop. He notes with a laugh that the last time he saw the princess, she was just a baby. She must not remember him. The princess sarcastically thinks that she only saw him once when she was reborn, so it is not surprising that she does not recognize him. The emperor coldly orders the bishop to hurry up and begin. Winston turns to one of the messengers and accepts his staff. Approaching Abella, the bishop asks her to close her eyes. Abella obeys, and Winston begins his ritual. To the sound of incantations, the wand projects magical symbols. Suddenly, the princess experiences strange sensations, as if her body is splitting into two. Winston notices that the princess is scared and asks her what happened. Abella tries to convince everyone that she is fine. She feels fine. The father is alarmed. The bishop explains that perhaps the princess's body, deprived of magic, could not resist the holy power, so the girl felt unwell. Bishop Winston bows before the princess and asks for forgiveness for being too careless. Suddenly, the emperor's face changes, and in an icy tone he asks, Since when did the temple become so bold? Instantly, the envoys, hearing the emperor's tone, covered the bishop with themselves. Abella turns to her father, assuring her that everything is fine with her and there is no need to worry. But for some reason, this time she fails to calm her father down. Having pulled himself together, Alvar asks Bishop Winston whether his so-called blessing has ended. The bishop bows respectfully before the emperor and answers in the affirmative. The father looks at his daughters and says tenderly that now they can go. Turning to Victor, Alvar orders him to keep a close eye on Princess Abella. As an apology, Winston asks the emperor for permission to have one of the temple's sons accompany the princesses during their training. Abella looks closely at the young man and wonders what the protagonist of the novel is doing here. The princess continues to look at the young man, who reminds her of an astrologer she met several years ago. Pagolite LeVictor bows and greets the emperor and the two young princesses. Hearing the unusual name of the knight, Abella realizes that this is really the main character of the book. The girl sadly thinks that if the main character has appeared, then her death is near. After thinking a little about the bishop's proposal, Alvar finally agrees. The princess is frightened by her father's consent, because the young man is one of the culprits of the book Abella. The father notices his daughter's strange reaction and asks if she really doesn't like such an apology. The girl decides to hide her true emotions and assures her father that she is upset about leaving. The emperor gently says that 3 years will fly by unnoticed, and before the daughter has time to blink an eye, she will be back home. Abella happily remembers that according to the plot, her death will happen after training, which means she has 3 more years. In the carriage, the girl reflects that she did the right thing by getting rid of the escort of the knightly order. Having imagined what it all could look like, the princess understands that she does not want to attract unnecessary attention to herself. Abella rests her head on her sister's shoulder and tells her that she needs to rest one last time before following etiquette around the clock. Lymeria reminds that they are not alone in the carriage, and the princess immediately sits up straight in fear. Looking at Pagolite, Abella asks if the Holy Knight knows about the House of Divine Magic. The young man is silent and just looks at the princess, which is why she begins to get very nervous. The knight thoughtfully wonders why Her Highness is asking such strange questions. Abella admits that the Holy Knight bears a striking resemblance to the one she met there. Lymeria asks with interest what the story was, but the sister does not want to go into details. The novel talked a lot about the main character. In the temple, he was lower in rank than only one person. Everyone called Pagolite a cold and heartless person. They said that, like the gods, human feelings were alien to him. This was the case until the hero met the main character Lymeria. The holy son of the temple learned feelings that were completely new to him. The young man was able to cry, laugh, and get angry again. He became someone he was not before. Abella recalls that while reading the novel, she was incredibly touched by such moments. The girl recalls that the boy she met that day was very sweet and kind. Unlike that boy, the face of the knight sitting in front of her looks like a piece of ice. The princess turns to the window and decides that she is thinking too much about that day. Suddenly, Pagolite asks Abella if the man she was talking about was an astrologer. The girl looks at the young man in surprise and claims that he still knows that guy. The knight replies that what he said is just an assumption, and he should think about it all. The guy continues that there are many people whose appearance is similar. You shouldn't be that surprised. Abella agrees that sometimes she does think too much. Looking at how Lymeria and Pagolite sometimes glance at each other, the younger sister gets the feeling that these two already know each other. After a while, Victor outside reports that the company has finally reached Enstein. The princess joyfully looks out the window and notices that this is where the teleport point to the academy is. Sitting at dinner, Abella watches the young people and wonders if they got into a fight. Victor and Pagolite sit completely calmly next to each other at the table and are not distracted from eating. Suddenly, the girl comes up with the question of how the young men shared one bed for 2. The girl abruptly puts her fork on the table and shakes her head in an attempt to get rid of strange visions. The Holy Knight remarks that the princess should focus on eating and not have her head in the clouds. Victor notes that he does not know about the girl's thoughts, but she should stop building ridiculous fantasies. Abella sheepishly admits that she became curious about how the young people shared the same bed. Victor looks at the princess in surprise and says that there are 2 beds in their room and everyone slept on their own. The girl asks again in surprise, because she definitely heard that there is 1 bed in their room. Pagolite explains that the large room went to the princesses, and he simply asked for a second bed to be brought to the small room. Abella turns to her sister and asks if she knew about this. Lymeria nods in the affirmative. The older sister is surprised that Abella is not aware. She was sure of the opposite. The girl becomes furious that it seems she was the only one of everyone who was not aware of the situation. To explain her interest, the younger sister says that she was simply worried about the comfort of the boys. Lemuria hands her sister a spoon and offers to try the treat, assuring that Abela has never tried this before. The princess looks at the plate and thinks that the treat is very similar to the steamed meat bun from her past life. Abela did not think that she would be able to taste her native food in a fantasy world made in a European style. The girl eats the pie and enjoys such a familiar and delicious taste. The company approaches the portal, and the youngest of the sisters is surprised at how many people are in the square. Lemuria responds that the Imperial Academy is one of the best on the continent, and many people dream of studying there. Abela speaks with horror about the huge line they have to stand in. Victor points to the side and says that the Imperial family has a personal teleportation point to the Academy. The princess happily notes that the Imperial family should indeed have privileges. Abela thinks that as vain as it may sound, having power and money is pretty damn cool. In a separate episode, Victor shows the princesses where they need to stand. The company stands on the portal, and a magical glow begins to swirl around them. The overseer speaks respectfully of the hope that their highnesses will have a busy school life. A moment later, the princess opens her closed eyes and hopes that they have already arrived at the appointed place. Turning around, Abela admires the huge and very beautiful castle of the Imperial Academy. Suddenly, a mocking voice is heard behind the young people, asking what such hillbillies could be staring at. A young man with red hair, standing a little to the side, brazenly declares that the Academy has no place for such scum as those standing in front of him. The sisters look at each other in amazement, and Lemuria says that the young man can hardly be a student at the Academy. Victor, oblivious to the insolence, tells the princesses that they need to register quickly. Abela, confused, says that they should really ignore the strange young man. The young people turn away and are about to leave, and the guy looks after them thoughtfully. The young man closely examines the girl's black-haired companion. Suddenly, the guy asks Victor if he is the same cursed child with black hair and red eyes. Abela turns sharply and, deciding that she misheard, asks again what the young man said. Victor clenches his fists tightly, determined not to react to the provocation. The knight convinces Her Highness that she should not pay attention to him. The young man does not give up and boldly asks the princess if she wants to know what it means to be a cursed child. Pagolite does not interfere in the situation, watching from the side as the impudent man sets his sights on Victor. Abela angrily orders the guy to say what he means. Nahal says that he is simply an indifferent person who does not want the curse to destroy the girl. The guy pokes Victor and shouts that he is a monster who took the life of his own mother, and the girl should stay away from him. Victor lowers his head in embarrassment and doesn't say a word in his own defense. Abela is furious and says that the guy is just a cowardly freak who asserts himself by humiliating others. The guy was clearly confused. He didn't expect the girl to rush so fiercely to the escort's defense. The princess tells her sister that the young man is very strange, timid in appearance, and he is jealous of Victor's appearance. Abela invites her sister to leave quickly, because they won't hear anything important here. Turning around, the girl decisively says that everyone needs to stay away from the young man, because his cowardice can be contagious. The guy becomes furious at the princess's words. No one has ever dared to call him a coward. The young man wants to rush at the offenders and show who is in charge, but his guards hold the young man back and ask him not to be rash. One of the guards leans towards his master and whispers that this is the princess of the Reifenstray Empire. Abela turns to the confused Victor with a cheerful smile. The girl is about to leave and asks Victor why he froze in place. The knight extends his hand to the princess and sheepishly says that they really have to go. The trio joins hands and cheerfully heads towards the building of the Imperial Academy. Pagolite lags behind, looks mysteriously at those ahead, and thinks that this is all very interesting. Entering the castle, the princesses giggle cheerfully, in anticipation of the beginning of a new, interesting life. Suddenly, Abela notices Victor's sad look and asks what happened to him. The young man lowers his gaze and suddenly asks if Her Highness is afraid of him. The princess is dismayed by his question and asks why she should be afraid of him. Victor sadly says that the girl should be afraid of his curse, which will bring her misfortune. Abela says that people shouldn't be considered cursed just because of the way they are born. Lemuria says that there are few people with black hair on the continent, and this was the reason for this statement. Pagolite indifferently adds that this statement is completely baseless. Abela remembers the real world from her past life, where black-haired people were encountered at every turn. The girl reflects that if everything were true, then most of her past world should be a victim of the curse. The princess looks at the guy and thinks that there was little information about him in the novel. The old Abela sent him back to her country too quickly. The girl desperately feels sorry for the guy because of such ridiculous discrimination, The thought of this brings her to tears. Abella approaches Victor and asks him to tilt his head a little. The young man kneels down, and the princess gently puts her hand on the guy's hair and says that everything is fine with him. The girl angrily says that everyone who thinks hair color is a curse is just a bunch of pathetic fools. The princess continues that with such a position on hair color, Lymeria must be an angel, and the Holy Knight must be the messenger of the archangel. The older sister laughs embarrassedly and thinks that only Abella could say something like that. The girl looks at her older sister in confusion and stubbornly says that it's true. Pagolite listens to the conversation with interest and asks who, in this case, Princess Abella herself is. The sisters look at each other in confusion, not knowing how to answer the Holy Knight's question. The girl was confused, but suddenly Victor's voice is heard, declaring that the princess is his goddess of luck. The young man approaches Abella and looks into her eyes with a feeling of deep gratitude. Pagolite and Lymeria watch this scene with emotion from the sidelines. Suddenly, Victor steps away in embarrassment and says that if they don't hurry, they will be late for registration. The guy leaves, and Abella stands still in embarrassment and wonders what it was. Suddenly, the girl realizes that she has blushed deeply, and her heart is pounding. Lymeria comes close to the Holy Knight and silently looks into his eyes. After a few moments without saying a word, the girl barely nods to Pagolite and leaves. The elder sister catches up with the younger sister, and the three young people leave, the Holy Knight thoughtfully watching them. The man looks intently after the trio and thinks that everything will happen very soon. Young people enter a huge hall, in the center of which there are tables for registering students. Abella approaches one of the employees, politely greets her, and says that they have come to fill out applications. The man hands the princess a thick stack of sheets and says that they need to fill out forms. Victor waves to Abella and says he found some free seats. Young people sit down and begin to fill out applications for admission with concentration. Suddenly, the girl looks up from her papers and asks her companions which direction they have chosen. Victor closes the pen cap and says that the warrior's direction has been chosen. Lymeria says, without a shadow of a doubt, that she chose the magical direction. Abella tells the young man that the position of magicians is higher, asks why the young man did not choose this direction, because he has power. Victor thoughtfully replies that it is better not to use such power as his. The princess realizes that she has made a tactlessness, because the knight's strength will only worsen the rumors about his curse. The girl happily reports that in this case, she will also go to military service. Victor tries to say something, but Abella quickly makes the necessary entry and says that the documents can be handed over. Later, the young man asks why Her Highness did not choose the magical direction. Abella answers with a laugh that it would be very strange, given her complete lack of power. The princess tries to cheer up the knight and says that if everyone went in the magical direction, then he would be bored alone. The guy waves his hand and says that, in any case, he is ready to sacrifice himself. Abella sighs and says that she doesn't want to get into an awkward position among the magicians. Lymeria says that if her sister had chosen the magical direction, she would have protected her from all her enemies. Pagolite, as always, listens attentively, but does not interfere in the conversation, only noticing that they have arrived. The company comes to a fork. 2 roads lead to different dormitory buildings. Abella looks at her companions and says that the time has come for them to part. The Holy Knight and Lymeria say that they will meet soon at the disciple sorting ceremony. The princess waves her hand to her companions. She is a little sad to leave them. The girl approaches the door, checking the number with the card, and realizes that she has found a room that will become her home for the next 3 years. Abella opens the door and sees that 3 girls have already moved into the room. The princess greets everyone with a smile, hoping that she has found new friends. Suddenly, one of the girls turns around, and it turns out that it is Blair, Abella's old friend. The girls greet each other, happy that they will now be roommates. Suddenly, one of the girls turns her head and asks if she is the same useless princess. Blair sharply cuts the girl off, saying that her insolence is simply unacceptable. The girl spreads her hands and says that if the princess does not have magical abilities, then what is the point of entering the academy? Abella coldly replies that the lack of magical power will not prevent her from studying at the academy, where there are many other directions. The girl embarrassedly puts her lipstick in the box and says that the conversation should have started with an introduction. The student stands up and says her name is Myra Marshall. Myra points her hand at the girl who has been silent until now and introduces her to Mary Leon. Abella politely introduces herself back and says she's happy to meet everyone. The next morning, the headmaster welcomes the students to the Imperial Academy for the placement ceremony. Victor listens with his eyes closed as the director talks about what awaits the students in the next 3 years. Myra listens in irritation and wonders how long the director will continue to rant. Embarrassed, Mary interrupts her neighbor, saying that she is simply behaving indecently. The roommates did not want to communicate with Victor because of the curse. As a result, the guy sat with the girls. Myra yawns demonstratively and asks how long they will have to listen to inspirational speeches. The princess says that representatives of the first-year students from the magic and military departments are still scheduled to speak. The girl remembers how before the ceremony, she decided to introduce Victor to her neighbors. Fortunately, the girls did not care at all about the guy's hair color, and they gladly accepted him into their company. Finally, the director finished his speech and invites a representative of the magic department to the podium. The girls whisper to each other as they wait for who has been chosen as their representative. Lymeria Larwood is proud to say she has the honor of representing her faculty. Myra looks at Lymeria with interest and suddenly realizes that this is the princess who was found only a few years ago. Abella thinks that, as expected, everyone's attention is focused on the main character of the novel. Suddenly, Blair turns to the girl and Victor and says that she needs to step away for a while. The princess asks how long they have to sit here. The young man, looking through the program, says that he only has to listen to the report of the representative of their faculty. The director offers to greet the first-year representative of the military department. Myra and Mary look in amazement at the girl entering the stage. Blair Aztec stands in front of the microphone and greets the freshman on behalf of the military department. Finally, the director says that the distribution is over and the freshmen can go to their classes. Myra is annoyed that Blair didn't say a word about her being chosen as representative. Abella laughs sheepishly, but admits that it was a little unfair. Blair says that the girls might have guessed, because she is the daughter of General Aztec. In the novel, the general was called the God of War. He had perfect skills and his children inherited these talents. The princess knew about this when she first met Blair, but she didn't think the girl would be so talented. Suddenly, Victor turns to the girls and asks what classes they are in. The girls begin to study the cards received during the ceremony with interest. Victor, Blair, and Mary are enrolled in Class A. Abella and Myra are in class under the letter F. The girls tear their hair out in horror and don't understand how they managed to get into the worst class at the academy. The Imperial Academy not only has a highly qualified teaching staff, but also a system of competition. Class A is the best. Only the best students with outstanding abilities get here. Class B is considered elite. Students who have seen great potential come here. Class C is considered a high class. Students have strong abilities, but they need to be worked on. Class D is considered a middle class, which includes students with average abilities, but distinguished by enviable perseverance and hard work. Class E is considered the lowest class. Students have very mediocre but stable abilities. And the last class is F, which includes students with the weakest abilities or no abilities at all. The girls cry out loud. Getting into the worst class at the academy is considered a complete disgrace and failure. Myra cannot understand how a girl of such noble birth ended up in Class F. Suddenly, in front of a group of students, a footman opens the classroom door, and a voice comes from there, calling for the worst students of the academy to come in. Sitting in a luxurious chair, students are greeted by class teacher Eric Potter. The students are amazed by the teacher's appearance and freeze in amazement. Abella thinks embarrassedly that if they are already the worst class, then there is no need to remind them of this every time. Myra does not try to restrain her emotions and shouts that such statements are unnecessary. Eric holds his chin and says that in front of him is a bunch of untalented, weak nobodies. The students are stunned by such terrible words, and even from the lips of the teacher says that if they want to prove that they are worthy of more, then they need to climb to the top. Mr. Potter grins and says that this will be their first task. Students gather in front of a huge rock and look up with amazement and fear. The princess looks up, where the peak is hidden in the fog, and asks if it is, in principle, possible to get there. Myra looks intently at the rock and says that they simply have to do this. Standing in front of the flying camera, the girl declares that she will not allow her teacher to look down on her. Suddenly, the camera says in Eric's voice that it is up to the students themselves whether they will get a student pass or remain the same losers. Mr. Potter says that without a pass, students will not be able to leave the walls of the academy, and without it, they will not last long here. The command is given to start the test, and the girls ahead of everyone run to the rock. The students run up to the foot and look up in amazement, not knowing what to do next. Abella decisively approaches the rock, grabs the ledge, and begins to boldly climb up. Looking at the girl, other students take an example from her and also begin to climb up. Suddenly, one of the students slips on a slippery stone, and at the last moment, the princess manages to grab her hand. Eric watches with interest and satisfaction on the screen as two girls, clearly leaders in their class, help everyone else get up. At one of the passes, Abella and Myra make sure all the students climb onto the ledge. Suddenly, students scream from behind, and the princess immediately rushes to the rescue. Cheryl struggles to sit on the ground, her legs bruised and her ankle clearly sprained. The girl carefully examines the student's leg and asks which of the students has restorative magic. The guy warns that he relieved the pain only for a while, and upon returning, the girl needs to see a doctor. Myra and Abella support the student, but suddenly she says she can't take it anymore. Cheryl cries and says that this whole climb is a complete waste of time because she is useless. Suddenly, Myra swings her arms and slaps the girl in the face with all her might. The girl angrily asks Cheryl if she can repeat what she said again. Abella holds Myra as the other girls run up to Cheryl and ask if she's okay. Myra angrily says that if the student doesn't mind being called trash, then she will stay with him for the rest of her life. The princess looks thoughtfully after her friend and thinks that, according to the plot, this did not happen. In the book, Myra and Abella quarreled over their different points of view. As a result, the princess became friends with like-minded Cheryl, and Myra was left alone. But in the end, when they found out the cause of the emperor's death, it was Cheryl who called Abella the killer. Myra was the second daughter of the Marshall family. Everyone considered her spoiled, capricious, and domineering, but to the great regret of the parents, the level of the girl's magical power turned out to be very low. Myra turned out to be not as capable as her older sister, and gradually turned into only her shadow. The girl was always compared to her older sister, and Myra was always less beautiful, less smart, less loved. Not receiving enough love, attention, and affection, Myra chose to remain alone. It was because of this that the girl grew up arrogant and selfish. Suddenly, it occurs to the princess that Abella and Myra are very similar in essence. After the return of Lemuria, the younger sister only faded in comparison with each passing day. Both girls were disliked, and they both hated the same word: trash. Turning to the students, the princess says that only those who believe that they are trash are worthy of the title of trash. Cheryl looks closely at Abella, whose words have made a strong impression on her. The princess catches up with Myra, and the girl angrily asks why she is here. Abella warms up and calmly communicates that she is here to work hard and get rid of the title of trash. The girls resolutely move on and suddenly notice that the whole class is following them. The princess suddenly thinks that their entire class resembles the books Myra and Abella. Eric follows the development of events with satisfaction. The two girls live up to his hopes. The students run on. They have only one goal today: to conquer the peak. Towards evening, Abella and Myra climb to the very top and are delighted to realize that they have made it. The princess looks around with admiration. Her heart skips a beat from the fabulous view. Perhaps because of that slap, none of the students gave up. When they fell, they rose to their feet again. Even though their class did not contain the most talented students, they were able to unite and persevere. The students watch the sunset, and everyone feels like they have reached the top of the world. Suddenly, Mr. Potter appears at the top and says that his class was not complete trash. Students look at the teacher with alarm. They no longer expect anything good from him. Eric grinningly tells the students that there is no need to be so nervous. This is the end of their first lesson. The man throws something into Abella's hands and says that each student needs to use a bottle and take a bath. The princess, confused, says that everyone should be given a bottle, but she only has one bottle. Myra examines the vial and says that there are traces of spatial magic on it. Suddenly, Cheryl separates from the students and asks permission to try to figure out the bubble. The girl picks up the bottle and casts a spell, spreading magical light around her. Suddenly, the rest of the vials begin to appear in front of her, one for each student. Cheryl explains that this is indeed spatial magic, and as soon as it dissipates, everything will return to its original form. Abella collects the vials, gives each one a bottle, and says that there must be something useful in there. The princess says that, according to Potter's teacher, this healing potion is very expensive. The next day, the girl listens to the lesson with pleasure and realizes that Mr. Eric knows how to attract the attention of students in ordinary ways. Finally, the teacher slams the textbook shut and announces that the lesson is over. The girls stretch tiredly and discuss that it is time for lunch and time to go to the dining room. Hiding behind a column, Cheryl watches her friends leaving. After the incident on the mountain, Cheryl began to experience unspeakable feelings for Myra. Suddenly, the girl plucks up courage and approaches her classmate and asks if she can have lunch with her. Myra smiles politely and says that she has already made plans to have lunch with her roommates. Cheryl looks after Myra as she leaves and happily thinks that the girl smiled at her. Victor, Blair, and Mary are already waiting for their friends at the dining room. The young man waves his hand at them in greeting. Myra looks at the stand with delight and is surprised to note how much variety of food there is. Abella laughingly says that it looks like her school cafeteria. Victor asks in bewilderment what the girl means. The princess realizes that she has said too much, and with a sweet smile, tells the young man that she didn't mean anything special. Suddenly, from the middle of the hall, Lymeria waves her hand to her sister and invites her to join her company. Abella approaches the table, notices Pagolite, and thinks confusedly that she didn't expect to see him here. Lymeria points to the red-haired girl and introduces her to Caroline, one of her roommates. The sister introduces the pink-haired girl as Alice, and the girl waves her hand at Abella in a welcoming manner. A modest, dark-haired girl with a book in her hand politely introduces herself as Felina. Suddenly, Alice says that she knows Abella because she is very famous. The princess says in bewilderment that she did not know about her fame. Alice says with a joyful smile that everyone knows about the trash princess with a complete lack of magic. Suddenly, Myra jumps up from the table and furiously asks what Alice means. Victor looks menacingly and ponders how quickly he will be expelled from the academy if he hits a student. Blair angrily says that Lady Alice does not understand who and what she is saying. Abella realizes with embarrassment that she didn't even have time to get a word in, so many people rush to her defense. Alice raises her hands in conciliation and says that she didn't want to offend anyone. She just voiced what everyone was talking about. Lady Caroline politely apologizes for her neighbor and says that sometimes she is too straightforward. Lymeria turns to her sister and apologizes for making Abella uncomfortable with her actions. After a while, the princess curiously asks the Holy Knight where his roommates are. Pagolite calmly replies that he had business with Lymeria and did not have time to meet his new friends. Abella understands in confusion that, and how in the book, the main characters begin to spend all their time together. Suddenly, Lymeria takes out a box and says that during her cooking class, she made cookies especially for her sister. Abella remembers her mountain climbing and is surprised to note that her sister has cooking lessons. The eldest princess sheepishly says that her cookies may not be as tasty as those in the store, but she really hopes that her sister will like it. Alice remembers that she asked Lymeria for these cookies for a long time, but she didn't give them, and now she's also giving her a magical handmade package. The girl is upset that to all her requests, the eldest princess replies that Alice can do all this herself. Abella understands that everyone already knows about her lack of strength, so she gratefully accepts the package. The girl remembers that in the future her sister will become the greatest magician, so the package is of great value. The sisters get up from the table, and Lymeria wonders if Abella will go to the library. Myra says they need to get some rest, and Blair says they have a fencing lesson scheduled. The princess looks at her neighbors and understands that the best class has a very rich program. Abella was so distracted that she did not notice the woman on the way and turned around and crashed into her with a tray of food. The princess anxiously asks for forgiveness and wonders if everything is okay with the lady. The woman snaps her fingers, the stain from the dress disappears, and she furiously demands the girl to tell her class and name. Lymeria fearfully tells her sister that in front of them is the magic teacher Miss Molly Yass, who hates people with weak magic. Abella is hysterical and thinks why in this world everything depends on magic. How can ordinary people survive here? The princess realizes that she has no choice and says that she is a student, Abella from Class F. Miss Molly looks closely at the girl and declares that she is the same princess without magical abilities. The girl looks away and admits that the rumors circulating about her are true. Suddenly, Myra runs forward and clearly wants to stand up for her friend. The princess doesn't want her friends to get into trouble because of her and turns to the girls and says that everything is fine. The teacher gloomily says that the princess at least understands her true situation. Abella states emphatically that if she doesn't have magical talent, she will try to excel in martial arts. Miss Yass turns away and finally says that at least something should work out for the girl. Myra angrily asks who this lady is that allows herself to humiliate people like that. Blair says that Miss Yass is one of the best teachers, but if she doesn't like someone, then that person's life at the academy will turn into hell. Myra stubbornly objects that this does not give the teacher the right to humiliation. Upset, Victor approaches the lady, but she immediately assures the young man that everything is fine with her. Lymeria asks her sister for forgiveness and says that she did not know that Miss Molly would behave this way. Alice states that Miss Yass has a bad attitude towards anyone who doesn't keep up with her lessons, and Abella is lucky to have escaped punishment. The princess sarcastically says that such luck looks very doubtful. Lymeria says goodbye to her sister, advises her to take care of herself, and says that her scroll will help the girl in a critical situation. Pagolite gets up, politely says goodbye to everyone, and says that it is time for him to go. On the way to the dorm, Myra still can't calm down and says that the academy has no place for teachers who look down on students. The unexpectedly silent Mary says that there are many people in this place who feel the same way. Myra notices that Mary is amazing. The nobles who studied martial arts since childhood are not even close to her, and the girl learned everything herself. Suddenly, the girl clings to her friend and asks to teach her too, but Mary embarrassedly says that she is not that good. The girl sadly recalls that she was forced to learn to defend herself in order to survive. Approaching the fork, Victor says goodbye to Her Highness and wishes her good night. Myra approaches Abella and says that Victor has already left, and it's time to stop looking after him. The princess is terribly embarrassed, blushes, and says that her friend misunderstood everything. Blair thoughtfully says that Victor is officially considered the princess's bodyguard, but in fact, he is also a prince who turned out to be a political hostage. Ignoring her friend's embarrassment, Blair reasons that if the princess didn't like the guy, he wouldn't be allowed into the academy. Myra and Mary say with interest that there is clearly some kind of backstory here, and they would be happy to listen to the continuation. Abella screams in horror that she is very embarrassed and begs the girls to stop tormenting her. But the friends do not abandon the topic and laughingly ask the girl to tell her why she liked Victor so much. The girls turn off the lights and go to bed. But suddenly Blair says that, according to rumors, the girls climbed the mountain all day yesterday. Myra jumps up in anger and declares that their teacher is just crazy, and now she can't even feel her legs. Abella says with a smile that, be that as it may, they were the first to reach the top of the mountain. Mary asks what lessons the girls will take tomorrow. It's not all the time for them to go mountaineering. Abella and Myra look at each other and admit that they can't stand this again. The princess remembers the bath with the potion and says that after the medicine from Mr. Eric, she felt much better. Myra tearfully admits that they were only given a day of rest, and Mr. Potter is a real demon. Blair says they need to get some rest and put off all conversations until tomorrow. Abella cannot sleep. Hurtful words constantly ring in her head, first from Mr. Potter and then from Miss Yass. The girl opens her eyes and thinks that she must do everything in order to change her reputation. The princess looks around and, making sure that the girls are sleeping, quietly gets out of bed. Abella lifts the pillow and, with a quiet rustle, takes out a sparkling necklace. Blair woke up from quiet rustling sounds and managed to see the princess quietly slip out the door. The girl hugs herself tightly with her arms. She did not expect that it would be so cold outside at night. Finding a remote gazebo deep in the garden, the girl mutters that the meeting place should be here. Abella takes out a necklace from under her scarf and looks at it carefully. Before leaving, Neil put the necklace on his neck and said that it was an artifact that would allow him to use the girl's hidden magic, and he had found a teacher who would teach her. The girl is shivering from the cold and mutters that if the teacher does not come soon, she will freeze to death. Suddenly, the princess hears a voice behind her that she doesn't need to wait any longer because that same teacher is already frozen. Abella turns around in fear and sees a shadow rapidly approaching. Miss Molly Yass appears in the gazebo and says that she is exactly the teacher the girl has been waiting for. The princess thinks in despair that she will be taught by the man who just this morning made fun of her in front of everyone. Abella suddenly begins to tremble at the thought that Miss Yaz might want to take this opportunity to punish her for her awkwardness. Miss Yaz irritably asks what the girl is thinking about, and are all the people around Mr. Neil really that strange? Abella sheepishly admits that she didn't expect Miss Molly to be the teacher Neil found for her. Suddenly, Molly's face contorts with rage that some girl would call Neil that casually. Abella notices the teacher's changed face and asks if she's okay. Suddenly, Molly points her magic wand at the princess and furiously asks what kind of relationship she has with Sir Neil. Abella is stunned by what is happening and says that Neil is just her butler. The princess thinks that Miss Yass is even stranger than everyone else and asks not to come up with anything extra. Molly blushes embarrassedly, puts her wand away, and says that everything is fine. The teacher says that she will fulfill Neil's request and will wait for the girl at 1 in the morning on Mondays, Thursdays, and Sundays. Suddenly, the woman leans towards the princess and asks if she really had nothing with Sir Neil. The girl waves her hands in fright and does not understand for what sins the butler sent his fan to her. Molly tells her to clear her mind and try to feel the magical power around her. Closing her eyes, Abella sees herself standing in a luminous circle and multicolored lights flying around her. The woman tells the girl to find the brightest flame and asks what color it is. The princess, without opening her eyes, examines the lights and says that the brightest one is purple. Molly nods with satisfaction and says purple would be fine. The teacher tells the girl to control the flame and try to make it appear in her hand, at which point the necklace begins to glow and rises into the air. Abella opens her eyes and is surprised to see that there is actually a purple light burning in her hand. Miss Molly says with approval that everything is working out well, and the girl has considerable talent. Abella laughs happily and says it's all thanks to the necklace Neil gave her. The butler specifically found an artifact in which part of the magic is stored, and the girl can use it. Miss Yass calmly replies that a gift from Sir Neil cannot in itself be bad. Abella notices that Molly's attitude has changed and wonders what kind of relationship she has with the butler. Plucking up courage, the girl asks the teacher how she met Neil. The woman says with a smile that it will be a long story, and it began when Molly was a freshman. Abella waves her hand impolitely, says that it is very cold outside, and asks to tell you briefly. The teacher turns away with displeasure and says only 2 words, an academic test. Unable to contain herself, Molly says with a dreamy smile that it was then that Neil came down from heaven. Abella again interrupts Miss Yaz mid-sentence, and looking at the fire asks how to use the spell. Molly sighs and says that the girl must feel her magical power and take control of it. After a couple of hours, the teacher says that's enough for today and it's time to end the lesson. Abella falls exhausted to the floor and says that they are finally finished. Molly admits that for a person who has never learned the basics of magic, the girl's level is quite decent. The princess happily stretches out on the floor. For the first time in her entire time spent at the academy, she was praised. Suddenly, a book lands next to the girl's head with a loud bang. Miss Yass says that this is a textbook on the basics of magic, and Abella should read it carefully. Molly says that the next meeting will take place in 3 days, and a moment later, only a few lights shine in the place where she stood. In the morning, Myra can't wake up and asks Blair to turn off her magic alarm clock. Mary finishes making the bed and says that if her friend doesn't get up now, she risks being late for class. Myra points to Abella sleeping peacefully and indignantly asks why the girls only wake her up. The princess wakes up from loud conversations and, with difficulty opening her eyes, sits up in bed. Abella desperately rubs her closing eyes and tries to randomly get to the bathroom. Watching her friend, Myra is surprised because they went to bed at the same time. Blair suggests that the princess was unusual in sleeping in a new place. Without opening her eyes, Abella crashes into the closed glass door with all her might. Myra says in amazement that it's definitely not like having a bad dream in a new place. The girls are sitting at a lecture, and Myra anxiously asks if everything is really all right with her friend. The girl continues that in the morning, Abella looked as if she had been pulled out of the grave. The princess understands that it all seemed a little strange, but she cannot tell her friend the truth. Who knew that Molly Yass was so strict and would keep the girl until 4 in the morning? Myra yawns desperately and says that no matter what, she also really wants to sleep. The girl hides behind a book and asks her friend to watch while she takes a nap, and then they switch. Abella also sits for a reason, hides a book on the basics of magic under her textbook and reads it carefully. Molly said that if Abella wanted to master advanced magic, then she needed to start with the basics. Miss Yass enters her room and notices that the magical crystal ball is flashing brightly. Approaching the table and touching the ball, Molly sees the face of Neil, who politely greets her. Molly is glad to hear the man and says that he finally deigned to contact her after such a long time. The butler asks the teacher to be more serious and says that he really wants to know how his mistress is doing. Miss Yass, annoyed, says that Neil knows she likes her, but only cares about her highness. The man says that Molly is a genius among magicians, and it's time for her to focus on an important matter and not think about stupid things. The teacher remembers that she is indeed considered the youngest great magician in the empire. Neil reports that the fewer people who know about the princess's training, the better it will be. Molly nods in agreement. Miss Yass reports that, much to her surprise, the princess is learning faster than the rest of her students. The woman reasons that if Abella tries, she will become very strong in the future. The bell rings, signaling the end of the lecture. Myra stretches contentedly, having had time to sleep. The princess thinks that every morning begins with Eric Potter's hellish training, and the day ends with late-night training with Molly Yass. But despite the fact that the girl constantly wants to sleep, she likes her current life. Myra notices that her friend has become somewhat secretive lately. Abella assures that it was her friend's imagination because they spend almost all their time together. At night, the girl continues to stand in the gazebo and train her control over the magic flame. Suddenly, the princess hears a crunching sound, immediately hides the flame, and turns around in fear. Victor, the young man, approaches the princess and says that she can still use magic. Abella looks at the guy and wonders why he ended up in a remote gazebo in the middle of the night. At least Miss Yass had already left. During training, Molly cast a special spell and said that while the girl was practicing in this gazebo, she might not think about time. Suddenly, Victor notices a strange necklace on the girl's neck and looks at it closely. The young man notices that the girl trains alone every evening and asks permission to help her with martial arts. Victor admits that it would be an honor for him to help the girl, especially since her progress in this matter is rather slow. The day before, at lunch, Abella angrily said that everyone was learning martial arts quickly, but she was practically standing still. The girl looks at the guy in surprise. She did not expect that he would remember the carelessly thrown words. The princess says that she will gladly accept his help and really counts on the young man. Victor looks closely at the girl and says that he will definitely help her. Young people stand in front of each other and get ready to train. The girl swings and tries to attack the young man with her hand. The guy quickly blocks the princess's blow and begins to explain her mistakes. Now, daily meetings with Victor have been added to Eric Potter's training and classes with Molly Yass. Sometime later, the girl began to move in a completely different way, and her experience advanced significantly. Victor admits with amazement that the girl's skills have improved significantly compared to her first training sessions. The guy says that if training continues at this rate, the young lady will soon become the first student in her class. The girl tries to come to her senses, thanks Victor, and thinks that despite the excellent result, he took a lot of energy from her. A group of young people walks along the corridor, and Blair asks with concern if Abella is all right. The princess assures that everything is fine with her, but she herself thinks that it is as if she returned to the time when she was cramming a bunch of homework. Myra says with resentment that her friend promised to spend time with her, but ended up getting a bunch of extra workouts. At night, the young people continue training, and suddenly Abella deftly jumps and delivers a powerful kick. Victor jumps on one leg for a long time and says with a laugh that the girl will soon give him a head start. The young man bows his head respectfully and says that Her Highness's level has noticeably increased. The girl hears these words with pleasure, which means all the training was not in vain. Victor turns and cryptically says that now it is time for them to begin the next stage of training. The guy lights a flame above his palm and says that it's time to learn how to use magic in battle. The girl looks fascinated at the fire in the young man's hand. It is as black as his hair. Victor spins the flame and sharply directs it to the side. A loud crack is heard, and a burnt mark appears in a tree not far from the gazebo. Abella watches everything that happens with delight and asks if she can really do this. The girl closes her eyes, concentrating on the flame. At this time, the necklace begins to glow and rises into the air. Victor looks at the necklace in amazement and wonders if this is what he is thinking about. Suddenly, the girl opens her eyes. Her flame unwinds into a mysterious symbol, and she forces it towards the tree. On the tree, below the mark from Victor's blow, a mark from the princess's blow appears. The young man looks at the girl with approval and says that for a first attempt, the result is quite good. She has obvious talent. Abella looks at her hands with delight and is surprised to realize that she can use her magic this way. The princess notices the young man's gaze directed at her neck and asks Victor if everything is okay with him. The young man continues to look at the jewelry and asks the girl where she got this necklace from. Abella looks down at the jewelry in surprise and says that it is a gift from Neil. The princess squeezes the jewelry in her hand and thinks that Victor has guessed something. Neil said not to tell anyone about the necklace in order to stay safe. The young man comes close to Abella, takes the necklace from her hands, and says that it is very expensive, so you should hide it under your clothes. The girl is so embarrassed by the proximity of the guy that she jumps away from him in fright. The young people continue their training. Victor tells how to correctly direct magical energy when defending and attacking. Finally, the guy raises his hand and suggests finishing the workout for today. Abella sits down on the ground and says that she is incredibly tired. The young man notices that becoming stronger is not easy. The girl grumpily notes that the guy himself learned everything quite quickly. Victor extends his hand to the girl and says that the ground is cold and it's time to get up. The young man easily lifts the princess, but for some reason is in no hurry to let her go. The young people are embarrassed, but cannot take their eyes off each other. Victor looks into Abella's bottomless eyes and in amazement notices a mysterious symbol in one of her eyes, representing a seal. The next morning, the princess draws something with a pen, her thoughts in the clouds. Abella remembers how Victor advised him to hide the necklace. Given his intelligence, he definitely understood something. Myra turns and asks with interest whose name her friend is writing. The princess looks down at the paper and is amazed to see that she has written Victor's name. The girl, in great confusion, closes the book with her hands and says that Myra misunderstood everything. A friend happily reports that if Abella writes the boy's name, it means she is constantly thinking about him. The princess waves her hands and understands that it will be difficult for her to explain something. The girl is intently sorting through books on a shelf in the library. Abella runs her fingers along the roots, but, as luck would have it, she cannot find what she needs. Closing her eyes, the princess fearfully asks for forgiveness and wonders if everything is okay. Looking up, Abella sees Victor, who assures the girl that everything is fine with him. The young people sit down at the table. Her Majesty asks what the guy is doing in the library, to which he laughingly says that he came for books. Taking the chosen book, the young man asks if the girl is looking for the book's seals. Abella understands that of course her bodyguard guessed everything. The guy sighs and says that the princess has nothing to worry about. He will help her with her search. Suddenly, the girl asks why Victor is helping her, because before she constantly mocked him, and there is no benefit for the young man in this matter. The guy puts his hand on the girl's cheek and, looking carefully into her eyes, says that he trusts her. A little later, Abella is in the clouds, remembering Victor's words and touch. Myra waves her hand in front of her friend's face, trying to get her attention. The girl asks in surprise why her friend doesn't react when her name is called. The princess sheepishly admits that she was just deep in thought. Her friends ask if Abella would like to go with them to see the club fair. Seeing the bewilderment in her friend's eyes, Mary hands her a leaflet and says that this is where they want to go. The princess looks at the leaflet with surprise, promising an encounter with various demonic animals. Blair says this is just one of the clubs, and then they want to go to the square. The girls remember that there are a lot of different clubs at the fair that are recruiting new members. The girls were given many leaflets, and Abella saw only one of them. Myra shakes her friend by the shoulders and urges her to hurry up. The fair will definitely be a lot of fun. Abella sighs and says that unfortunately she won't be able to go because she has an appointment. Myra enthusiastically asks if her friend has a date. Abella runs to the exit and says that the girls should go alone, but she is in a hurry. Myra looks thoughtfully at the slammed door and thinks that something clearly happened to her friend. Abella goes down to the foot of the stairs and freezes in anticipation. Her companion lingers. Myra peeks out from the bushes and whispers that she was right and something definitely happened. The whole trio of friends are sitting in the bushes, and Blair, confused, asks if Myra is sure that they are doing the right thing. Then the girls notice that Victor is hastily approaching Abella. Suddenly, Myra jumps up and says loudly that she was right. The princess and the young man hear some noise and turn around to look, but there is no one around. The young people decide that it seemed to them. Victor says that it is time for them to go, and the couple goes into the building. The girls hide in the bushes and burn with shame because they are spying on their friend, and even almost got caught. The princess reads another book from the pile brought and is upset when she realizes that there is nothing in it either. The girl puts the book in a pile. She has already read many volumes about seals, but she has not found anything related to hers. Abella looks distractedly out the huge window and happily thinks that spring will come very soon. Victor comes up with another pile of books, and noticing the girl's upset look, asks what happened. Having found out what the matter is, the guy says with a smile that the princess's seal was applied a long time ago, so they can only look for the answer in books. Abella examines another book and wonders if its seal could be related to the seal of the church. Since the girl began to learn magic, she feels not only the seal, but also some strange limitation. The girl recalls how a few years ago an astrologer said that she had a seal on her. Abella compares the two guys and realizes that although they are very similar in appearance, they are completely different in character. Suddenly, Abella hears a strange sound and feels a draft suddenly flowing through her legs. Victor is standing at the far shelves, but instead of one of the walls there is a strange passage gaping. The young man says that the passage was already open when he arrived, and it looks very likely that this is a secret room. The young people look at the passage. The guy asks with interest if they will go inside. Victor presses his hand to his chest and says that he will protect the princess from any danger. Abella says that of course they will go and begins to quickly go downstairs. Pagolite approaches the table with books and examines one of them with interest. Lymeria approaches the Holy Knight and says that clearly someone has been here recently. The princess notices that the readers were clearly distracted by something. They left the books and left. Pagolite looks at the bright magical light with interest and says that everything is possible. Abella goes down the stairs and suddenly freezes in front of a lantern, which lights up on its own. Victor explains that the lantern is not powered by electricity, but by magic, so it automatically lights up when it spots people. The young man notices that the lamp and marks on the walls indicate that the secret room was built quite a long time ago. Suddenly, Victor pushes his jacket aside and carefully presses the button of his shirt. At the same moment, illuminating everything with magical light, a sword appears in the young man's hands. The girl examines the button with interest and asks if it is a magical tool that is used to accumulate magic. Victor nods affirmatively and says that the girl is absolutely right. Magical tools refer to objects modified by magical powers. Almost any item, be it jewelry or weapons, can be changed using magical power. Once modified, Items can become a dangerous tool for killing or a treasure that secures a position in society. But having reached the bottom, the young people find themselves in a fairly large hall. Abella wonders if this type of hidden room is used in novels to hide terrible beasts or to store treasures. The princess digs into her pocket and reflects that such places are often filled with traps and secret passages. The girl takes out magic coins and confidently throws them along the route. Young people watch as a magical fire appears in the middle of the hall. Suddenly, the flames go out, leaving only a handful of white ash on the floor. The puzzled Abella understands that there is a trap set here, but there was nothing of the kind in the plot of the novel. Victor looks thoughtfully at the ashes, agrees that a trap was set along the way, and says that they need to be more careful. The young man takes out a sword and says that Her Highness should stay behind him while traveling. The princess suddenly blushes and is touched that Victor is acting so politely. The young people cautiously walk forward. The young man covers the girl with himself and holds his sword at the ready. Suddenly, a strange roar is heard, which gets closer and closer. Suddenly, hundreds of arrows rain down directly on Victor and Abella from all sides. The guy swings his sword with great speed, preventing the arrows from breaking through his defense. Suddenly, Victor mutters an apology and scoops the princess into his arms. Holding the girl close to him and continuing to swing his sword, the guy gradually retreats deeper into the room. Finally, the young people manage to escape from the barrage of arrows and hide behind one of the columns. Abella takes a breath and says that judging by the traps, it will only get more difficult. The princess looks at the young man and says that she did not expect such dexterity from him, asking in surprise what kind of magic he used. Victor is embarrassed and admits that he has black magic. In the Empire, most people are born with magical abilities, the most common types being natural ones such as wind, fire, water, forest, and earth. But there are also other variations of abilities that are somewhat less common. This is the possession of fire or ice. One of the rarest, light magic, which is also known as sacred power, such people most often become priests. However, there is also black magic, which is even less common and is on a par with sacred power. Abella listens to her friend in surprise and now understands why he is so strong. The girl reflects that perhaps in the future, a situation may arise when she will have to go against the church. If you have to choose between the Holy Knights and Victor, then the choice for the princess is obvious. Abella looks at the young man. Under his protection, she feels completely safe. Victor becomes embarrassed under the girl's gaze and says that they need to move on. After some time, the young people hit a blank wall. Victor takes off his jacket and says that there are no more traps in this place, so you can rest peacefully. The guy notices that the floor is cold, and Her Majesty should be careful not to catch a cold. Abella sadly says that going through all these tests, she realized how weak she was. The girl tried to use her strength, but nothing worked, and she survived only thanks to Victor. The guy tries to calm down the upset girl and says that there were too many traps in this place. The princess reasons that there must be something valuable hidden in the secret room, if it is guarded so carefully. Suddenly, the girl remembers that in the original novel, a secret book was hidden in a secret room. The princess puts her hands on the floor, thinking that in the story, the church sent people to look for this book, but no one could find it. Suddenly, right behind Abella, a mechanism creaks into motion and part of the wall moves to the side. The princess does not have time to say a word. In horror, she realizes that she is falling into the abyss. Victor turns around at the sound, runs to Her Majesty, and tries to grab her hand. Realizing that he cannot stop the fall, the young man immediately jumps after the princess. In flight, the guy somehow manages to regroup, ends up with his back down, and hugs the girl tightly to him. A moment later, the young people land on the stone floor. Abella, completely unharmed, hangs directly over Victor and looks at him with fear. The guy opens his eyes and begins to move carefully, checking if all the bones are intact. Suddenly, the girl, realizing how close to each other they were, quickly jumps to the side. Abella doesn't know what to say or how to get out of this awkward situation. The princess stealthily examines the young man, waiting for him to say at least something. Suddenly, the guy approaches the girl, which frightens her and makes her even more confused. But Victor straightens up, looks around carefully, and says that they are trapped. Abella says that she accidentally set some kind of mechanism in motion, and because of this, they ended up here. Victor examines the walls, but they look absolutely the same, and it is completely unclear how they can get out of here. The princess stands up decisively and says that there must be a way out. You just need to look for it. Well, after some time, the girl sits down on the floor in despair and admits that there is absolutely nothing here except the walls and floor. The young man sees the girl's frustration and suggests that she take a break and look again. Abella begins to mutter monotonously that if she hadn't wanted to go to the secret room, they wouldn't have been trapped. The girl insists that if her abilities were better, then no one would have to protect her. Victor looks at the princess in confusion and assures her that everything is not like that at all. Abella doesn't hear the guy's words and insists that she has only herself to blame for everything. The young man grabs the girl by the shoulders, looks carefully into her face, and realizes that something is wrong with the princess. Abella continues to mutter that because of her, they are trapped and are now waiting to die. Victor looks at the girl and realizes that she has been exposed to black magic. The guy changes his face and asks the princess for forgiveness because he has no other choice. Victor resolutely takes Abella by the head and presses his lips to the girl's lips. The princess rolls her eyes, her body relaxes, and she falls unconscious. The young man picks up the girl and carefully puts her on the floor, waiting for her to come to her senses. A few moments later, Abella opens her eyes and looks around in confusion. Victor watches with relief as the girl comes to her senses. The princess sits down, shakes her head, and asks what happened to her. The knight explains to the girl that demonic magic has penetrated her mind. The princess realizes that this could have killed her because she clearly remembers her suicidal thoughts. Demonic magic can charm people and bring out the worst in them. Abella begins to shake and admits that it was really scary. Suddenly, the princess turns to Victor and asks how he managed to get her out of this state. The guy blushes and whispers that demonic magic can consume itself. Abella looks at the young man who has turned away in bewilderment and realizes that he is clearly not saying something. As the princess waits for an answer, Victor tries to come up with something, but ends up just babbling incoherently. Suddenly, the guy looks at the girl with honest eyes and says that he can't remember. The princess, frightened, asks if she did anything bad while the black magic was possessing her. The girl runs around the guy, feeling him from all sides, believing that she could hit him. Suddenly, Victor stops the princess, taking her hand, and calmly says that she thinks too much. The young man says that the demonic force has already retreated, which means everything is in perfect order. Suddenly, a frightening roar is heard around, and everything around begins to tremble. Behind the young people, a stone platform rises from the floor. Everything calms down. Abella turns around and is amazed to see a podium and a large book on it. Victor thoughtfully examines the book. It turns out that it was the secret room that protected it. Abella looks at the find with interest and wonders if this could be the one. In the novel, a forbidden book was hidden in a secret room. So could it be that they found it? The Secret Forbidden Book is an ancient book of legends that contains everything about magic on Earth. Whoever can use the book will be able to rule the whole world. After thinking a little, Victor takes the book in his hands, begins to leaf through it, and gradually more and more surprise appears on his face. The young man runs up to the girl, grabs her hand, and happily says that inside there are ways to remove the seal. The princess lowers her gaze in amazement and looks at her hand, which the guy tenderly squeezes. The young people shyly withdraw their hands and turn in different directions. Victor turns and repentantly asks Her Majesty for forgiveness for his tactlessness. Abella assures the young man that everything is fine and there is no need to focus on this. The guy continues to leaf through the book and says that it should contain everything related to magic, and even ancient magic should be mentioned. The knight decisively says that they will take the book with them, study it carefully, and remove the seal from the princess's body. The girl reflects that the book, which contains a description of all the secrets of magic, must certainly contain information about sealing. Abella is doubtful that they will be allowed to take the book from the secret room. The princess shakes her head furiously and decides that she needs to solve problems as they come. Abella is sure that the first thing to do is to take the opportunity to find records of sealing magic. The girl picks up a book and thinks that she needs to do everything possible to solve her problem. Suddenly, loud blows are heard from one of the walls. The young people turn around in fear. The princess looks at the wall in bewilderment and thinks that there are still quite a few surprises left in the secret room. Suddenly, there is a loud crash, and the wall begins to collapse before our eyes. A bright flame flashes, illuminating everything around, and the director of the academy appears in the gap. The silhouettes of teachers are visible behind him. The director examines the young people and asks if everything is all right with Her Majesty. The princess curtsies and says that everything is fine with her. Mr. Potter runs up to the girl and reproachfully says that it is too early for her to spread her wings, having achieved only little progress in her training. Miss Yass furiously grabs Victor by the ear and shouts that he had no right to drag the princess into such adventures. The director says with a grin that there is no need to scold the students too much. The main thing is that everything is fine with them. The old man puts his hand on the girl's head and says that next time the princess should not so recklessly go down into the secret room. Suddenly, the director says that there are quite a lot of strange things in the secret room. Has Abella seen something like that? Looking closely at the girl, The elder asks if she has come across, for example, an old book. The princess doesn't have time to say anything before she feels that Victor is pulling her sleeve, clearly giving some kind of sign. The guy comes forward and confidently declares that they didn't come across anything unusual. Abella suddenly looks at her empty hands. In the chaos, she did not notice that the book had mysteriously disappeared. After thinking a little, the princess confirms that they did not see any book. Victor respectfully folds his hands behind his back and listens to what the director tells them. Suddenly, the button on the cuff of his shirt begins to glow with a magical light. The director invites the students to return to their rooms, and they, supported by Mr. Eric, get out through the hole in the wall. Once in the corridor of the academy, a couple of students bow their heads guiltily and say that they won't do this again. The principal notes with approval that the students have realized their mistake and advises them not to worry their teachers anymore. Looking after the leaving students, Eric asks if they did the right thing by letting them go just like that. The director thoughtfully says that most likely the young people did not understand anything and really did not see the book. If the students had encountered the last trap emitting devilish magic, they would have been dead long ago. The director orders the secret room to be restored, and its defenses made much stronger in order to avoid such incidents. Miss Molly finally says that the training is over. Abella can barely stand on her feet from weakness. Suddenly, Miss Yass looms over the girl and angrily tells her that she shouldn't go there, which she has no idea about. Gradually disappearing, the woman more calmly advises the girl to rest properly in the next 2 days. As soon as the teacher has disappeared, Victor comes out from behind the column and approaches the princess. The young man lights a flame in his palm, says that they need to talk, but first they need to do something. The guy swirls magical waves around the gazebo. Abella asks with interest what he is doing. The girl, Victor, is silent, pulls off his jacket and touches the button on the cuff. The button is activated, and suddenly that same secret book appears in the guy's hand. The guy hands the book to the girl and says that they still need to remove the seal from it. Abella, in amazement, bombards Victor with questions about how he was able to take the book out of the room and how it ended up here now. The guy embarrassedly admits that when the director showed up with the teachers, he managed to hide the book. The young man explains that he could not do otherwise. This is the only chance to help Abella. The girl picks up the book and thinks with excitement that it contains a huge number of magical secrets. Suddenly, the book rises into the air and begins to turn the pages on its own, and spells begin to flicker in the air. The princess reads the names in amazement. What is not there? Combat magic, protective magic, healing magic, and much more. Abella peers intently at the spells and suddenly finds what she needs: the magic of seals. Suddenly, the book breaks out of the girl's hands and begins to fly from side to side. The tome rises high into the air. Young people watch what is happening in fear. Victor, following his premonition, summons a sword and asks Her Majesty to be careful. The book hangs in the air for some time, and then quickly flies straight towards the young people, clearly intending to attack them. Victor doesn't have time to do anything. The book crashes into the girl's chest with all its force, illuminating everything around with a bright light. Abella sits on the ground and does not understand what happened. Victor runs up to her with alarm. The girl jumps to her feet, looks around, and says in amazement that the book flew right into her. The princess raises her hands and tries to call upon her magic, but everything remains the same as it was before. The girl, in despair, says that the strange incident did not affect her magical abilities. Victor thoughtfully says that often, magic acquires a soul as soon as it finds its owner, and says that now Her Highness should feel the soul of the book. The girl says that she doesn't feel anything like that, to which the guy replies that the book was probably looking not for its owner, but for its keeper. The young man explains to the surprised princess the difference between the owner and the keeper. The girl learns that too strong magic creates destructive magical energy, which is looking for a place to store power so as not to lose it altogether. Abella realizes in horror that she is now just storage space. The princess happily takes care of the flowers, rejoicing at the opportunity to escape from her problems. The teacher claps his hands and says that everyone did a great job today and that the lesson is over. Suddenly, Abella quickly says goodbye to Myra and says that they will see each other again. The girl runs up to Victor, who is waiting for her, but the guy sees her embarrassment and asks what's the matter. Under the gaze of her friend, the princess takes the guy by the arm and leads him out of the greenhouse. Abella says in despair that all last night she tried to summon the soul of the book, but nothing worked. Victor says that according to rumors, at one time His Majesty the Emperor himself was recognized as the owner of the book. If old books are damaged, this also affects their soul. It happens that the soul suffers, even if the magic of an ancient book is harmless, and soon the book loses its magical power. Victor says that the book they found is fine, but its magical power must be powerful. The girl reasons that this is probably why the soul of the book is wounded, and chose it as its keeper. Abella says that the soul of the book hopes that it can heal in the girl's body. The princess is sure that they need to wait a little, and perhaps the soul will be healed, and then they will be able to find out what they need. The girl is so engrossed in conversation that she doesn't notice the young man coming around the corner and bumps into him forcefully. Victor grabs the princess's arm, who is rubbing the bruised area. A young man with red hair rubs his bruised forehead in frustration. Suddenly, the guy pounces on his offender and shouts that she dared to offend the prince himself. Suddenly, the guy falls silent and looks at the couple standing in front of him in surprise. Suddenly, the guy with a grin declares that in front of him is the very strange princess of the kingdom of Riefenstray. Abella looks at the strange guy in surprise and realizes that she has already seen him somewhere. The young man declares that he did not expect anything else from the acquaintances of the wretched Victor. Then the princess remembers that in front of her is the same little bastard whom they met on the first day at the academy. Prince Vilno is the fourth prince of the kingdom of Serenia. This is not mentioned in any way in the kingdom itself, but in fact, there are 7 princes in Serenia, of which Victor ranks third. The princess heard that Vilno simply cannot stand being called the fourth prince. The guy just can't come to terms with the fact that Victor occupies a higher level on the social ladder. The prince and his friends begin to mock the girl, asking why the royal person studies kung fu and not magic. Victor watches what is happening with a gloomy look and says that he simply has no words. Noticing that the young man has clenched his fists, Vilno asks if he really wants to start a fight. The prince mockingly waves his finger and says that there is a punishment for fighting on the territory of the academy. The young men look at each other with hatred. Vilno clearly provokes Victor. Suddenly, a voice comes from behind the bushes, declaring that Prince Vilno is rumored to be very successful in magic. Coming out to the company, Lemuria says that, apparently, the prince is strong not only in magic. Vilno bows respectfully to Lemuria and says that he is flattered to meet her. The eldest princess says that she would love to study with the prince in order to improve her magical skills. Vilno is very confused. Some kind of game is being played, but he cannot grasp the meaning. Lemuria takes Abella's hand. Her sister understands that she is calming her down in this way. The girl approaches the prince and says that she is sure that he will not refuse her small request. Pagolite calmly notes that training between students is not prohibited at the academy. Vilno is a coward and says that he is only in Class B, while Lemuria is one of the best students in Class A. The girl lights a flame in her palm and says with a smile that everyone is equal at the academy. Abella suddenly steps forward and asks for permission to deal with the problem herself. The princess rubs her fists and says that Vilno will not refuse to measure his strength with her. The prince points his finger at Abella and asks what she can do with her weak hands. Victor summons a sword and threateningly says that the prince must watch his words, but the girl stops him with a gesture. The princess says that, with Vilno's permission, she will hit him with her small fist. The prince and his friends silently look at each other and then double over with laughter. Vilno says with a laugh that of course the princess can hit him, since she wants it so much. Lemuria tries to stop her sister, but she assures that everything is fine. The girl approaches the guy. Next to him, she looks very small. Abella says that if the guy is ready and has not changed his mind, then she starts. Vilno confidently convinces the princess that he is always at her service. The girl gets ready, remembers everything Victor taught her, and raises her fist to strike. The girl's fist flies with incredible speed and force straight into the boy's chest. The prince's friends and Pagolite look at what is happening in silent amazement. None of them expected this. Having received a powerful blow, Vilno flies several meters away and crashes forcefully into the door of the greenhouse. Friends run up to the guy and try to figure out if everything is okay with the prince. Abella says with a laugh that she never expected the guy to not be able to withstand a little fist bump. The prince runs away with his friends and shouts that he won't leave this so easily, and they will certainly meet again. The girl looks thoughtfully after those running away and wonders if Vilno really gave up so quickly. Abella happily thinks that she learned Victor's lessons well and was able to fight back against these assholes. Lemuria looks at her sister in amazement, but admits that the prince got into trouble with his words. The sisters hold hands. The youngest assures that nothing bad happened. Abella happily declares that even without practicing magic, she can protect herself with the help of martial arts. The girl winks at her sister and tells her in confidence that she has very good teachers. The sisters turn to Victor, who, in embarrassment, pretends that he does not understand what the conversation is about. Pagolite calmly says that if Her Majesty says so, then there is really no reason to worry. Victor reminds the princess that it is lunchtime, and if they don't want to go hungry, then it's time to go. The princess says goodbye to her sister and the Holy Knight. saying that she and Victor still have business to do and will see the company later. Lemuria stares at her sister as she leaves and doesn't say a word. Abella enters the room and comes across Myra's furious gaze. The girl waves her hands and says that she will explain everything now. The friend gets up and, with resentment in her voice, says that Abella promised to go with her and see the clubs. But instead, she ran off on a date. The princess apologizes and says that this time she will definitely go with Myra to see the clubs. The girl crosses her arms over her chest and says that her friend will go with her right now. The girl is indignant. They can't go right now because she hasn't even had lunch yet. Myra grabs her neighbor by the hand, leads her to the exit, and says that right now Abella will eat and they will leave right away. The girls go to the fair. Myra is completely delighted with everything she sees. Suddenly, a friend stops Abella, points to the side, and asks if Mary is there. Mary actually walks among the crowd of people and distributes some leaflets. The girls look at each other in surprise, wondering if their neighbor really joined some club and didn't tell them anything. The girl offers the leaflet to another passerby, but then she hears someone calling her name. Abella and Myra wave warmly to their surprised friend. The princess says that they came to look at the clubs, and in the crowd of people, they notice their neighbor. Myra turns away offended. She did not expect her friend to be so secretive. The girl, embarrassed, tries to justify herself, saying that initially it was not her idea. Suddenly, a joyful voice is heard from the side, asking Mary if new people have really come to them. The girl fearfully says that these are just passersby asking for directions. Mary sheepishly tells the girls that they should leave. Their social club is not suitable for roommates, and they should find another place. Suddenly, a guy appears in front of the girls and says that recruits are already hard to find, and Mary also dissuades the girls. The girl embarrassedly says that these are not recruits, but her roommates. The young man approaches his friends and invites them to join the Adixaran Union. The guy says that anyone can join their club, but they work hard and improve their skills. The main task of their club is to surpass the court aristocracy in everything. Abella smiles quietly and asks if they can join the noble commune. Myra straightens her shoulders and takes great pleasure in telling the head of the club that they are none other than royalty. The guy is horrified by what he hears. Next to them, he feels funny. Mary pushes the girls aside and says that she warned them that girls do not belong here. Abella notes that she and Myra would really be better off finding another club of similar interests. The girls walk around the square and see that there are a huge number of clubs. There is even a beauty club. Before Abella had time to say a word, there was no trace of Myra. A friend enthusiastically reports that she has made a decision and really wants to join the women's club. Myra waves her hand and advises Abella to look for a club based on her interests. The princess was discouraged. Her friend dragged her to this fair and ended up leaving her alone. After looking through many different clubs, the girl comes across a tent, next to which there is not a single person. Abella comes closer, reads that the club is called the Society for the Study of Special Magic, and politely greets the guy sitting at the counter. The head of the club, Arthur Bobetsky, raises his absent-minded gaze and looks at the girl. The princess points to the tablet and says that she wanted to know about special magic. The guy lazily takes out a piece of paper from the table and says that any magic that goes beyond the ordinary is considered special. Arthur says that if Miss is interested, she can read the information in the leaflet. Abella looks at the ugly flyer with surprise. Advertising is clearly not the strong point of this club. The princess thinks that special magic should also include the magic of seals. It is quite possible that she will find something useful. The girl thinks for a couple of moments and decides that she will just take a look, but will definitely not join this club. Abella looks at Arthur and asks what she needs to do to join them. The guy looks at the girl in amazement and asks what she meant. Suddenly, the young man turns pale and begins to cough up blood. Abella looks at the guy in horror and asks what she can do and how to help him. Arthur asks the girl not to worry. Every time he experiences strong emotions, this happens. Having come to his senses, Arthur begins to fill out the candidate form and asks the girl to give her name. The guy hands Abella a piece of paper and says that she needs to come tomorrow at the specified time and place. The princess clutches the piece of paper to herself and has a strange feeling as if she is digging her own grave. Abella arrives at the appointed place and looks around in surprise. There is no one around, and the house itself looks abandoned. The girl didn't think that there could be anything worse than the office of their worst class at the academy. Suddenly, the door swings open. Arthur runs out and admits that he really didn't believe that the girl would come. The young man pushes the princess in the back and says that they are already impatiently waiting for them inside. In the room, two young men clap their hands joyfully and happily welcome their fourth member of the club. Abella, confused, asks if the club can consist of only 4 people. The girl understands that she made a rash decision, but there is no turning back. Arthur resolutely declares that Although there are few of them in the club, they are all united. The girl asks the leader to be excused for being too enthusiastic, but if they don't have a new member this year, they will simply be closed. The young man explains that if a club does not accept new members for 3 years in a row, the student council considers the club useless and closes it. The girl says that the student council consists of the 12 best students of the academy. Under the supervision of teachers, they are given special rights over other students. Arthur says that since Abella is with them now, nothing threatens their club this year. Suddenly, the girl says that we shouldn't forget that there will be a guild meeting in 3 months. Abella is surprised by the information that is piled up on her and asks with interest what kind of meeting this is. The young man explains that at this meeting, each club demonstrates its achievements to teachers, and based on this, funding is distributed. The girl says with a laugh that few people understand what they do, so they always have the smallest budget, which makes it difficult to attract new members. Abella smiles sweetly, and she herself thinks that she also doesn't really understand what's going on here. Artut puts the cup on the table and says that their club is mainly concerned with the development and use of special magic. Finally, the man decides that it is time for a formal introduction and says that he is Arthur, the head of the society. The girl says that the princess can call her Is, and the guy introduces himself as Kino. In response, the princess kindly says that she is glad to meet everyone and introduces herself. Abella examines the club's library with interest and is amazed that most of the books cannot be found even in the academy's library. Kino told the girl that Arthur brought all the ancient books and they used to belong to his family. Arthur has the rarest magical ability in the world, time. He can speed it up or slow it down, but the price for such a powerful force is the health of its owner. It may not be obvious from the young man, but he knows that he cannot escape his fate, which is why he created his own club. The princess looks through the books and is disappointed to realize that not one of them contains the slightest mention of her seal. Abella is sure that only the secret book can help her, but she still does not feel her soul. The girl presses her hand to her chest and hopes that the soul of the book will soon heal and provide answers to all her questions. The friends are sitting in class. Mr. Potter comes in and says that he has an important announcement. Eric happily congratulates the students and informs them that they will have a mock final exam. The teacher reports that this year, students are allowed to divide themselves into groups of 4. Mr. Potter says with a grin that the exam is only 2 weeks away, so he advises the students to make the most of it. Myra turns to her friend with delight and says that the whole room can be in the same group. Abella is embarrassedly silent, and her friend understands that she has her own plans for this. The girl disappointedly says that everything is clear to her. The princess, of course, will want to be in the same group with Victor. The princess hurriedly packs her things, muttering that she still has work to do and needs to go. Abella hurriedly leaves amid Myra's furious screams that this is not what you do to friends. The princess walks through the park, thinking that Victor must be here somewhere, and turns her head around. Victor respectfully greets the princess and says that he is glad to see her. The young man says that he was looking for Abella because he needs to tell her something. The girl admits that she was looking for a guy for the same reason. Abkilla remarks with a smile that they obviously want to say the same thing. The young people start talking at the same time, inviting each other to be in the same group for the exam. Over lunch, the young people are thinking about the need for their group to come up with a name. But so far, there are no ideas. Abella tries the pasta and is delighted to realize that it tastes simply divine. Suddenly, the girl comes up with an idea and invites her companion to call their group carbonara. Victor rubs his chin thoughtfully and says that it sounds quite good, and perhaps we can stop at this name. Suddenly, the girl hears a voice speaking to her and puts her fork aside in surprise. Pagolite approaches the table and asks the young people if they would mind if he and Lemuria joined their group. Abella is silent, but she immediately has a bad feeling. The princess looks at the holy knight in amazement and asks if she heard correctly. A joyful Lemuria runs up and says that her sister heard everything correctly. The girl says that as soon as she heard about the groups, she immediately thought about her sister. Abella smiles, but thinks to herself that in a team where one of the girls is the main character, there will always be danger. The girl is desperately thinking about whether it is possible to refuse someone without being rude. Lemuria looks at her sister's hesitation and sadly asks if Abella is awkward around her. The younger sister begins to wave her hands and says that the older sister misunderstood everything. The girl says that the 4 of them have never worked out together, and she is worried that they won't cope. Pagolite notes that he, Lymeria, and Victor are among the top 3 in the academy, so there shouldn't be any difficulties. Suddenly, her sister asks Abella if she remembers what her father told them before they left. other than that they should be careful. The sister recalls the words of the father when he told his daughters to take care of each other. Lymeria assures that this is why her younger sister must be by her side. In the evening, the princess makes her bed and thinks that she was simply left with no choice. The girl decides that she needs to stop worrying. Just wait and see what happens. Abella continues to hone her fighting skills, but her thoughts are focused on something completely different. Victor steps aside and asks the princess why she is upset. The young man approaches the princess and asks if she is really that worried about the exam. The guy affectionately strokes the girl on the head and says that he will protect her from all dangers. Suddenly, the young man says that they will continue training tomorrow, but now the princess needs a good rest. Mr. Potter ends the lesson and says that the students can be free. Myra tells her friend that their team has already been formed and asks who else will be on the princess and Victor's team. Abella, confused, says that Lymeria and Pegolite have joined them. Myra exclaims in amazement that their team consists of the top 3, and there is no doubt about victory. The friend shakes the princess by the shoulders and begs her to share at least one of the leaders. The girl upsetly says that she will be glad if her friend can convince them to join her team. Myra looks at her friend in bewilderment. She doesn't understand at all what reason she has to be so upset. Abella quickly runs to the exit, saying as she goes that it's time for her to train. Running out of the classroom, the princess notices that Victor is already waiting for her and happily waves to him. The girl asks why the young man came so early, because their companions had not yet arrived. Victor explains that he had nothing better to do and invites the girl to practice before the rest of the team arrives. At the same moment, Pegolite approaches the young people and greets Her Majesty. The knight notices that no one is there yet, but the princess says that Victor has gone to open the simulator. The girl invites the young man to join them, but Pegolite asks her to wait. The holy knight extends his hand to the girl, on which lies the bracelet. Abella examines the jewel in surprise. The bracelet is very similar to the one the astrologer wanted to give her. The knight says that this bracelet is a gift for Her Majesty and asks to accept it. The girl waves her head and says that she cannot accept such an expensive thing. Pegolite reports that the princess has nothing to worry about. The bracelet is blessed and will protect her during training. The girl extends her hand, and the young man is about to fasten the bracelet on her wrist. Suddenly, Victor grabs the princess, removing her hand, and declares that there is no need for this. The bracelet falls to the floor. The bodyguard declares that he himself will protect Her Highness. Pegolite has absolutely nothing to worry about. The young man picks up the bracelet and says that he had no thoughts of doubting Victor's abilities. He just wanted to play it safe. The guy looks menacingly at the holy knight, and the princess feels awkward from his behavior. Seeing that the girl is upset, Victor asks for forgiveness for the inconvenience caused. Lymeria approaches the company and, seeing their tense faces, asks what is going on with them. The young people look at each other with obvious hostility, which does not escape the attention of the girls. Lymeria turns to her sister and asks what happened here. Abella laughs and embarrassedly says that she herself does not understand what happened between the guys. There is such frightening tension between Victor and Pegolite that the girls are shaking with fear. Suddenly, the holy knight smiles relaxedly and says that he is glad that the bracelet is intact. It would be sad if it broke. The sisters breathe a sigh of relief. It seems that the storm has passed. The knight states that the bracelet contains temporary mana, magic scrolls, and more, and was created to ensure the safety of Her Highness. Abella looks at the jewel with interest, wondering if the bracelet really has magical powers. The young man holds the bracelet and says that it was the desire of the church and His Highness the Emperor to give it to Abella. The princess reflects that if this is her father's wish, he may be angry if she does not accept it. The girl understands that if she shows disrespect for the church, this could cause a conflict between her father and the church. Abella extends her hand, even though she doesn't like the idea, but it's still better than going against the church. Victor turns to the princess. He still believes that she should not accept this gift. The princess hesitantly extends her hand and watches as Pegolite hangs the bracelet on her. Suddenly, the girl turns to Lymeria and asks if it would be better to entrust the bracelet to her sister. She will definitely be able to keep it. Abella begins to tug at the bracelet, but is frightened to realize that it does not come off. The knight explains that the bracelet has a special spell placed on it. Once it is placed on Her Highness, only she can use its power. Pegolite turns to Lymeria and says that she also has a similar thing. The girl takes out a pendant from under her clothes and asks if the holy knight is talking about it. The girl examines the jewelry and says that she did not suspect that it was from her father. Abella decides that since Lymeria is doing well, she has nothing to worry about, even though the pendant is slightly different from the bracelet. The princess shakes her hand with the bracelet, and Victor looks at him with concern. The young man approaches the princess and says that he will find a way to remove it from her hand. Lymeria, standing a little to the side, quietly asks Pagolite if they managed it, to which the young man nods in the affirmative. The older sister enthusiastically takes the younger sister by the arm and says that it's time for them to enter the simulator. The company leaves, and the Holy Knight goes to the window and takes out a paper crane. Having waited for the crane to fly out the window, the young man quickly catches up with his companions. The company finds itself in a simulator, where the first task is to defeat the monster. Victor and Abella draw their swords, and the young man asks if everyone is ready to begin. Lymeria and Pagolite hold magic staffs and nod affirmatively. The young people rush to attack, each using force depending on their abilities. A few hours later, Abella collapses on the ground, exhausted, and says that they are finally done. Victor notes that Lymeria's last attack was weak, but that the girl replies that she was afraid to hurt her sister who was nearby. Pagolite looks thoughtfully at the sisters and says that their coordination is still rather poor. The girl asks for mercy and horror because she has absolutely no strength left. In the evening, Lymeria carefully asks her sister, who can hardly stand on her feet, if everything is okay with her. Not wanting to show her weakness, Abella waves her hand cheerfully and assures her that everything is just fine. The sister enthusiastically says that upon returning, they will need to analyze the training and everything that did not work out for them. Abella looks at her sister in despair. Why doesn't it occur to her that she needs to take at least one day off? When the sister and the knight left, Victor tells the princess that he did not notice anything suspicious, although he carefully watched the Pagolite. The young man thoughtfully says that if the knight and the magician are the same person, then he is simply a master of disguise and will not give himself away so easily. The princess reflects that she has long suspected Pagolite, but he did not leave any traces that would point to him. Abella looks at the bracelet. It looks exactly like the one she saw in the divine house. The girl does not believe that this could be an ordinary coincidence. The knight ordered to keep the bracelet until the very end of the exam, but all this looks too suspicious. The princess irritably realizes that she is left with no choice in anything. Victor gently says that there is no need to worry about what the girl cannot fix, and at the moment, he needs to focus on the upcoming exam. Abella understands that the young man is right. As always, problems need to be solved as they arise. The princess says that she wants to hide for the time being that she has magic, and asks Victor to keep this information secret. Half a month later, a huge crowd of students gathers in the square in front of the tower to take a mock exam. Abella is surprised by so many people. Victor closes her and asks her to be careful. Lymeria and Pagolite appear not far away and call the young people to their place. The director of the academy appears in the tower window and greets the assembled students. The director waves his hand and declares that the 30-second exam begins right now. The princess thinks that they will soon end up in a simulation, and she feels uneasy. Pagolite leans towards the girl's ear and says that as soon as the exam begins, he will certainly protect her. Victor immediately stands between the young people and says that he will personally protect Her Highness. The knight mockingly asks what is wrong with the princess having one more protector. Victor also mockingly says that both princesses need protection, and Pagolite should take more care of Lymeria. Abella gets tired of these bickering and tries to calm the guys down. The older sister watches the skirmish and thinks that she can defend herself perfectly well. Pagolite looks towards the portals leading to the simulation and says that they need to go there. Victor takes the princess's hand and asks her to concentrate and not be distracted. The young people go to the portal, and the girl says with a smile that she will try her best. The princess says that the team is called Carbonara and lists the names. The manager thoughtfully writes down the information. Abella asks in surprise if everything is okay. The teacher explains that after moving, students may feel a slight discomfort, which will quickly pass. The team stands on the portal. Everyone closes their eyes, shrouded in a magical glow. Suddenly, the princess opens her eyes and notices the teacher's very strange gaze directed at her. After a moment, the princess opens her eyes and looks around. She has the feeling that something has gone wrong. The girl looks around in confusion and doubts that she got into the trial test. Abella suddenly realizes that there is deathly silence around her, and moreover, that there is no one nearby. Having moved into the simulator, 3 young people open their eyes and look around. Victor turns his head around and shouts in panic that Her Highness is missing. Lymeria puts her hand to her mouth, and Pagolite says that the princess is not answering the call of the magic crystal. Victor is seized with real panic, and he announces that he is going in search of the princess. Lymeria runs after the young man and says that of course she is going with him. The Holy Knight remarks that the exam site is huge and they should split up. Victor threateningly asks if the church didn't provide a searching spell for such a case. Pagolite calmly looks at the young man and replies that, unfortunately, he does not have such spells. The eldest princess says that they need to find Abella as soon as possible because she is all alone. The girl panics and says that if her sister meets someone or a whole group, it could end badly. Young people quickly decide who will go in which direction to search. Lymeria takes out a magic crystal and asks to immediately inform her if anyone finds her sister. Abella looks around anxiously and cannot decide what to do next. Hearing voices, the girl hides in the bushes and wonders whether she should go with another group. The princess understands that she alone cannot cope with everything that can happen in this forest. Abella examines the broken crystal and realizes that there is no way she can contact her team. Suddenly, the girl hears a voice behind her asking what she was thinking about. A guy very similar to Pagolite is sitting on a log and looking at the princess with a grin. Abella looks closely at the young man and is surprised to realize that in front of her is the same astrologer from the divine house. The young man jumps from the tree and declares that he and the princess have not seen each other for a long time. Abella calls the guy Pagolite and asks what he's doing here. The young man approaches the girl and says that she has confused him with someone, and this is a cruel blow to his heart. The magician, with the same grin, says that the stars told him that her highness was in danger. Abella stares at the guy and wonders what danger he is talking about. The young man speaks that the girl is clearly lost, extends her hand, and offers her help. The princess did not accept the hand, calmly walked around the guy and thanked him for his attention. Surprised by the girl's behavior, the young man turns around and looks after her in confusion. Abella turns and declares that if the magician wants to help her, he should not stand rooted to the spot. The guy starts laughing and asks the girl to stay close to him. Walking through the forest, Abella notices that the Imperial Academy was originally created for aristocrats. The young man turns around and asks, "Since when did astrologers' predictors become part of the aristocrats?" The girl just can't figure out whether the magician and Pagolite are really different people, or whether the young man is just so skillfully pretending. The guy calmly continues that, although the academy is an elite place, they allocate several places for ordinary students with unusual abilities. Abella remembers Mary because she is also a commoner, but she got into the academy under a special quota. The girl is surprised that she has never seen the guy in class, to which he replies that he studies in a slightly different place. The princess notices that they have been talking for so long, and she still hasn't learned his name. The magician turns to Abella and mysteriously says that now his name is not important. What is important is the name of the princess herself. Suddenly, the bracelet on the girl's wrist rises into the air and begins to sparkle. Everything around is illuminated with light, and cracks begin to form under the princess's feet. Suddenly, the ground disappears from under Abella's feet, and the girl realizes in horror that she is falling into the abyss. The princess reaches out her hand to the magician, but he only looks at her indifferently, making no attempt to help. The young man watches with satisfaction as the abyss illuminates with light and absorbs the princess who has fallen into it. The guy hears footsteps behind him and turns around. Lymeria silently approaches the magician with her staff and watches as the light over the abyss gradually goes out. His Majesty Emperor Altvar Larvud sits at his desk and works on important papers. The emperor, whose thoughts are not at all occupied with state affairs, angrily notices that yet another feather has broken. There is a knock on the door, and the footman reports that Sir Neil has arrived. The butler enters, bows respectfully, and greets His Majesty. Alvar asks how his daughter is doing. Neil happily reveals that Abella is currently taking a trial exam. The emperor looks at Neil and says that he remembers their final year exam well. Along with Neil, there were 2 other girls on the team, but it was the butler who led his team to victory. Neil admits that he did not think that His Majesty was interested in other students. Alvar notes that Neil's family has always taken their responsibilities with great responsibility. Suddenly, the emperor invites Neil to go to the academy right now and visit the princess. Abella has been falling for quite some time now, but still doesn't land. Suddenly, some mysterious magical symbol forms around the girl, and the girl falls right into its center. The princess sits up abruptly and grabs her knee, which is pierced by a sharp pain. Abella looks around in amazement and sees that she is sitting right in the middle of the desert. The girl thinks about what happened to her and comes to the conclusion that she has fallen into a magical matrix. It was upon contact with the matrix that the magic bracelet was supposed to heat up, which is what happened to it. Images of a magician and a Pagolite flash before Abella's eyes, but she can't figure out if it's the same person. The girl clutches her head in despair. Everything that is happening is too confusing. The girl angrily tugs at the bracelet, but it does not come off and does not break. Suddenly, the girl hears cries for help and sees some approaching silhouette. After taking a giant leap, a strange beast man lands in front of Abella. The girl looks at the strange creature in fear and finally ceases to understand where she is. A man who looks like a cat, clearly frightened, asks the princess to help him. Suddenly, the girl hears an approaching rumble, and a whole crowd of beastmen appears from the clouds of sand. Abella screams in horror that there are too many people approaching, and how can she help here? The cat says that it is too late to run, and tells the girl that she needs to stand still and not interfere. The princess understands that it's time to run, but the cat grabs her hand tightly. Having waited for a certain moment, the young man pulls the girl with all his might and shouts that she needs to run. Abella desperately doesn't understand why she's doing all this. Not only is it unclear where she is, but she's also now being persecuted. The cat turns around and confidently says that the girl next to him is in no danger. Suddenly, a huge ball with spikes flies near the heads of the young people, miraculously not hitting anyone. The goat man shouts with rage that Delphi will definitely not leave him this time. Suddenly, the goat notices Abella standing nearby, who begins to tremble in horror at his gaze. Suddenly, the goat declares in bewilderment that the girl is not Semirita. The princess even opened her mouth in amazement. She doesn't understand what these strange creatures are talking about. When asked by the director what forced the emperor to honor the academy with his presence, Albert says that he wants to visit his daughter. The director smiles and says that both princesses are performing well, but Lemuria especially stands out and has a great future ahead of her. The emperor closes his eyes in displeasure, which does not escape the elder's attention. The director quickly says that Her Highness Abella is trying very hard to teach, and Eric praises her for her perseverance and rapid progress. His Majesty is drinking tea and notices that there is a mock exam today and says that he wants to look at it. The director, embarrassed, says that he cannot allow outsiders to interfere during the exam. The look and the whole aura around the emperor instantly changes, and he says in a quiet voice that he just wants to look and nothing more. The elder is frightened by the cold energy emanating from the ruler and says that he will arrange everything. With a sigh, the headmaster hopes that the students will not do anything that might not please His Majesty. Understanding the consequences of the emperor's dissatisfaction, the elder hopes not to lose the academy. The director touches the magic ball on the table and activates it for broadcast. An image of Lemuria, Victor, and Pagolite appears in the ball, discussing how they were never able to find Abella. A wild crash is heard, and the cup in the emperor's hands shatters into a million pieces. Altver's eyes fill with fire, and flames begin to flare up around the man. Delphi looks attentively at the princess, his tail constantly spinning from side to side. Abella examines the young man's appearance, jumps away from him in horror, and shouts that they are different. The cat quickly appears next to the girl and looks intently into her eyes. Suddenly, the young man begins to quickly run around the girl and sniff her carefully. At this point, Delphi jumps sharply away from the girl and exclaims, with obvious fear, that she is a human. There is deathly silence, and many eyes of strange creatures look at the princess. The girl's heart sinks into her throat, and she asks what's wrong with people. Abella suddenly closes her eyes sharply and tries with all her might to call for Victor. At this very moment, the young man clearly hears in his head the voice of his mistress calling him. The young people stand in front of the emperor, and the director angrily asks if this is how they are supposed to protect the princess. Victor gets down on one knee and repentantly says that he is to blame for what happened. Alvar quietly says that such things happen under everyone's control. The school director has shown unacceptable irresponsibility. Pagolite repentantly says that he is very sorry, but due to his limited capabilities, he was not able to solve the problem in time. Lemire, the emperor, turns away in rage, cutting off the princess mid-sentence. His Highness orders the director to immediately find the manager who showed the way to Her Highness. With cold rage, the father says that if something happens to Abella, then Victor's nation, the academy, and the church will be wiped off the face of the earth. Victor lowers his head and says that he is ready to sacrifice everything just to find the princess. Pagolite states that the church will make every effort to find Her Highness. The goat states that, among other things, Delphi has also contacted a man, and now he will judge him on behalf of the patriarch. The cat admits in horror that he had no idea that the girl was human. Delphi extends her sharp claws, assumes a fighting stance, and says that now is not the time to talk. The young man is very dexterous. He easily dodges any blow. Suddenly, the goat shouts to his henchmen that they must deal with Abella. The princess understands that she has no choice and will have to use magic. In desperation, the girl releases a powerful magical discharge, striking the creatures around her. The goat, distracted from the cat, looks in amazement at what is happening nearby. Abella easily stops the hammer flying at her. Magical lightning brightly illuminates everything around her. Suddenly, Delphi begins to shout that there is a great witch in front of them. The goat raises his hand in doubt and orders everyone to stop. After thinking a little, the Beastman takes out a magic scroll and tells the cat that this time he will let him go. But next time, there will be no such mercy. A bright light envelops the creatures, and finally, the goat advises Abella not to mess with Delphi. Disappearing, the Beastman reports that the power of the Semirids is not something that people can control. Suddenly, memories of the territory of the Semirides pop up in the girl's head. Delphi says that it was not in vain that he saved the girl. Now she saved him, and we can assume that they are even. The cat looks at the girl and suddenly asks with interest how she even got here. There are many small and large countries on this land, the most powerful of which is the Reifenstrai Empire, which is revered by everyone. But there are rumors that there are less powerful places outside the empire where martial arts are valued. The territory of the Semirids has never interested people, so few people know about the existence of this world. Abella wonders if the magicians sent her to the territory of the Semirids on purpose. Delphi became desperate to get the princess's attention and ended up screaming loudly in her ear. The girl covers her ears and says that there is no need to scream so loudly. The cat, Abella, sighs sadly and admits that she has no idea how she got to these lands. The princess summons a magic scroll and says that she definitely needs to find her way home. The girl remembers the disappearance of the beast people. They also use the scroll, which means she should succeed too. Abella thinks that she needs to indicate the coordinates of the academy as accurately as possible, and then she will be able to return. Suddenly, Delphi grabs the girl by the shoulders and begs the savior to take him with her. The girl says that she is returning to the human world, and the cat has nothing to do there. But the young man insists that he has nowhere to stay here. The princess asks with interest what the young man has done that he is being pursued by such a crowd of beast people. Delphi embarrassedly says that he is too weak, so those types do not favor him. Abella thinks that in a world where martial arts are most valued, the young man really looks pathetic. After thinking a little, the girl sighs loudly and agrees. The princess states that if Delphi wants to go with her, then she should at least know who he is. The guy puts his hand on his chest and proudly declares that he is Delphi from the tiger tribe. Abella thinks that the cat is clearly not suited to a tiger, but says out loud that they should get ready to leave. Suddenly, behind Delphi, Abella notices a strange black cloud that is gradually growing. The cat turns around and asks in amazement if this is the same matrix. The princess says that it may be a matrix, but it is definitely not the one she creates. Young people approach the black hole and cautiously look inside. Suddenly, very slowly and with difficulty, someone's hand appears from the hole. Abella gloomily watches what is happening. She no longer expects anything good, but Victor emerges from the portal and says with relief that he has finally found Her Majesty. The princess looks at the young man with relief and joyfully says that he found her. Victor falls to his knees and desperately asks the girl for forgiveness for not saving her. The girl asks how the guy was able to find her, and then suddenly notices that he is very pale. Suddenly, Victor's eyes roll back into his head, and he begins to fall unconscious. Abella screams in horror, not understanding what happened, because the young man had never shown weakness before. The girl holds the guy and carefully peers into his face. Even while delirious, Victor non-stop asks the princess for forgiveness. Delphi approaches the girl and asks with interest if this guy is Abella's fiancé. The girl waves her hands embarrassedly and says that everything is wrong and they have a completely different relationship. The princess says that Victor is just her bodyguard and turns her eyes away from the cat, to which he just grins. Abella grabs the young man by the arms, tries to drag him, and tells Delphi that they need to find a suitable place to rest. The cat points to the side and says that there is a quite suitable cave there. After a while, the girl settles Victor's head on her lap and says that he is very overtired. He needs to rest, and everything will be fine. Delphi notices that the guy addressed the girl as a person of noble blood. Abella corrects the young man that this is how they address princesses. The guy looks at his companion in amazement and asks how the princess could end up in the lands of the Semirids. The girl thinks that she still hasn't been able to understand why the magician sent her to this world. The princess tenderly brushes the hair from Victor's forehead and wonders how he was able to find her. Abella wonders what a commotion there must be at the academy right now because of her disappearance. The girl does not feel a drop of magical power from Victor and sadly thinks about what he had to go through to find her. Suddenly, the princess sees with great relief that Victor begins to come to his senses and opens his eyes. Abella says she is very glad that the young man has finally woken up. Suddenly, Abella immediately begins to apologize for disappearing and causing everyone to worry. The young man says that what happened is not the girl's fault and asks how she got here. Victor turns sharply and says in bewilderment that Semiride is nearby. Delphi rushes at the princess and declares that his meeting with the savior was destined by fate itself. Abella moves away from the cat to a safe distance and explains that she accidentally fell into the Matrix and ended up here. The girl approaches Victor and asks how he found out that she was here. The young man remembers that he had to use the darkest magic, which took all his strength to get here. The guy understands that the princess does not need to know about all the horrors that he had to go through. The girl understands that Victor does not want to tell her everything, takes out a scroll, and says that they can easily return. Delphi looks over the princess's shoulder and asks her not to forget about her promise. Abella admits that the power of the magic scroll is not enough for so many people. Victor decisively says that if Semirides appears in the human world, it will cause panic. Delphi, at this time, the girl, not paying attention to the cat's words, activates the magic scroll. Delphi understands that the young people will now disappear forever. The guy understands that he just needs to get out of here. If he stays, then everything will end very badly. If he cannot get into the human world in his usual form, then he should resort to transformation. A bright flash appears, and a moment later, there is no one left in the cave. Having moved, Victor and Abella look around cautiously. Finally, the girl looks at her feet and sees a big cat, who in the voice of Delphi, declares that the human world is much better than the world of the Semirides. The princess looks at the animal in amazement and asks how he ended up here, and even in this form. The cat states that Victor himself said that in his usual form, he would cause panic among people, so he accepted it completely, harmless looking. Young people think with annoyance that they simply did not want Delphi to appear in their world. The cracking of branches is heard. Abella grabs the cat in her arms, and Victor covers the girl with himself. Shaking herself off, Lymeria emerges from the bushes and notices a guy with a girl. The older sister runs up to the younger sister and exclaims with tears in her eyes that Abella has finally been found. Lymeria hugs her sister and thanks God that she is okay and nothing happened. Abella assures that she is fine and asks to let her go, otherwise the cat can't breathe. Lemire Pagolite emerges from the bushes and greets Her Highness. The Holy Knight says that, since everything is fine with Her Highness, the Emperor can now be calm. The princess turns and stares at Pagolite with suspicion. Victor looks at Abella worriedly and asks if everything is okay. The girl turns away, strokes the cat, and says that everything is fine. Lemuria notices Delphi, runs up to her sister, and asks where she got such a pretty kitten. Not knowing how to explain or what to tell, Abella replies that she found him. The princess anxiously says that her father must be worried, but Pagolite says that he has already sent him a letter. The girl looks at the young man and thinks who really set her up. Alvar looks out the window, and his heart swells with anxiety for his daughter. Suddenly, Neil runs into the room and shouts joyfully from the threshold that Princess Abella has been found. The butler reports that Her Highness has been found safe and sound. Neil tries to say that the princess is heading to the director's office, but there is no trace of the Emperor. The company heads towards the exit from the forest, and the girl asks Victor if he remembers the magician from the Divine House. The young man says that of course he remembers and is interested in why the princess suddenly asked about this. Abella looks at Pagolite's back and again decides that she and the magician are similar only in appearance. The girl recalls that the magician reacted very strangely when she called him Pagolite. Victor quietly asks if the princess is sure that this is the same person, but she admits that she does not know. The young man says that after Her Highness disappeared, Lymeria went on a search with Pagolite. Abella looks at the young people and understands that if the magician and the knight are still one person, then Lymeria is in cahoots with him. Suddenly, the older sister feels the younger sister's gaze and turns around sharply. Abella whispers to Victor that in any case, they have no evidence and there is no need to tell their father anything. Suddenly, Lymeria approaches the young people and asks what they have been whispering about all the way. The younger sister tries to justify herself and says that Lymeria was imagining things. Approaching the clearing, Pagolite turns to his companions and says that they have left the exam area. The princess happily runs out of the forest and stumbles upon her father's entire army. The Emperor comes out into the clearing and looks intently at his daughter. Abella thinks in despair that they couldn't find her for a long time and that her father is probably terribly angry with her. The girl fearfully approaches the Emperor and greets him and Neil and sincerely asks for forgiveness for making them worry. The butler bows and says that he is incredibly glad that nothing bad happened to Her Highness. The princess hesitantly turns towards her father and is frightened and cannot utter a word. The daughter decides that her father is beside himself with anger and desperately says that she is very sorry. Suddenly, the father rushes to his knees, hugs the princess tightly, and thanks the heavens for finding her. The girl asks her father in surprise if he is angry with her. Alvar asks in surprise why he should be angry. Abella replies that it was her fault that she got into the Matrix and made everyone worry. The Emperor gently strokes his daughter's head and says that she is not to blame for what happened. Suddenly, the ruler turns to the three young people and says that only they are to blame for failing to protect the princess. The girl rushes to her father in horror, trying to attract his attention. Abella says she was only able to return thanks to Victor, who did everything possible to find her. But Victor does not recognize his merits. He says that this is his only duty. The emperor listens carefully to the young people, not yet knowing how to react to their statements. Suddenly, a loud meow is heard from below, attracting all the attention of those present. Neil looks at the cat in amazement and wonders where he came from. Abella takes Delphi in her arms and tells him that she saved him from his pursuers, and since then, he has been following her everywhere. Alvar looks at his daughter in confusion. At that moment, the daughter became incredibly similar to her mother. Abella holds the cat in her arms, almost the same way her mother held her. The princess looks at her father with huge eyes and begs him not to blame Victor for what happened. As he leaves, the father says that because his daughter returned safe and sound, he will make an exception. Delphi is extremely pleased with himself. No one is able to resist the charm of the cat. Abella wakes up to the bright sun, which gently shines on her face. Heidi happily reports that it is time for Her Highness to get up. The maid combs the girl's hair and remarks that she really missed the times when she did her hair. The princess is incredibly happy to be home. After everything that happened to her, the father took his daughter back to the castle. The emperor considered that the academy would not be able to provide the princess with adequate protection, so she should interrupt her studies. After the princess left the academy, the rest of the students also decided to return home. Since then, Abella began a boring series of days similar to one another, consisting of sleep and eating. Delphi looks at her owner and begins to meow loudly. Heidi says with a laugh that even a kitten understands how bored the girl is. The girl looks at the cat and thinks that he has settled down well in the castle. Since moving to the palace, Delphi has been surrounded by the love and care of Heidi and the rest of the maids. The princess notices that the cat has recently gained noticeable weight, although she stubbornly denies this fact. Victor says that Abella can invite Lady Blair to visit, because their estate is located not far from the castle. The princess regrets that Myra and Mary live too far away and are unlikely to be able to come. Neil enters the girls' chambers and asks if Her Majesty would like to go outside the palace. The butler reports that if the girl wants to take a walk, she will need to take security with her. Abella looks at the company of knights in horror and says that this is already crossing all boundaries. Neil reports that the princess needs to continue her education, and he will personally do this, and invites the pupil to familiarize herself with the plan. The princess looks at the huge list in horror and says with indignation that this is beyond the scope of the academy course. The butler pulls the princess by the hand and says that there is no time to waste, and the lecture will begin right now. Victor and Heidi look at Abella approvingly and say that she will succeed. Young people walk around the city. Victor endlessly looks around, and the princess rejoices in freedom. Lately, all she had been doing was practicing magic control under the strict supervision of Neil. The young man anxiously asks the princess not to leave his side because there are too many people around. Abella reproachfully says that Victor took an entire army with him just so that she could take a walk. The young man asks to treat his words with understanding, but the safety of the princess comes first for him. The girl notices that the guy's skills have improved noticeably lately. The princess was amazed at how the young man dealt with the guards so quickly. Abella notices that with such strength as Victor's, all the need for protection disappears by itself. The girl asks when the guy managed to gain such strength. Victor says that after he spent all his magical energy, he became many times stronger. The young man admits that he is glad that he can now protect the princess even better. Abella starts to say something, but suddenly Victor makes a lightning-quick hand gesture. The guy puts out his hand, and the princess sees that he is holding Delphi by the scruff of the neck. The princess shakes her head reproachfully and says that they need to find a deserted place. Young people come to a deserted alley, and the cat jumps from Victor's arms. Delphi reproachfully says that the princess cannot go off to have fun, leaving him alone. Abella sits down on her knees and explains to the cat that she didn't take him with her only because he could get lost. Delphi calmly replies that if the princess carries him in her arms, many problems can be avoided. The cat stares at the girl, but she firmly declares that such techniques will not work with her. Delphi's eyes widen and begin to hypnotize the girl. The amazed princess sits down on her knees in front of Delphi and begins to affectionately scratch his head. Suddenly, Victor grabs the cat and declares that he will carry it himself. The girl comes to her senses and suddenly notices a familiar cloak flashing around the corner. Abella gives chase, without explaining anything to the perplexed bodyguard. The princess runs to the shop where the man in the cloak has hidden and looks at the sign indicating that this is a divine house. Victor finally caught up with his companion and asks Her Highness who she was running after. The girl asks Victor if he remembers what she said. Returning from the portal, he nods affirmatively. After thinking a little, the young man says that this is their chance to clarify the situation. The prince Abella knocks, opens the door, and freezes in amazement at the picture that opens to her. At the table, opposite the magician, sits her older sister Lemuria. Abella asks in surprise what her sister is doing here. Lemuria turns to her with the same question. The younger princess smiles and innocently says that she has come to see the great astrologer. The elder sister declares that there was a coincidence. She came here for exactly the same purpose. The magician greets the princess and says that he has an important matter. He is watching one person. The young man asks Her Highness to forgive him, but unfortunately, he cannot give her time and asks her to come later. Lemuria flinches from her sister's gaze as she examines the pendant around her neck. The sister takes Lemuria by the hand and asks if this is where the girl found her jewelry. The eldest princess nods in fear. The magician intervenes and declares that if Her Highness wishes, he can give her exactly the same one. Abella thanks the young man for his concern, but does not want to take advantage of his generosity. Victor leans over to the princess and says that it is time for them to go. On the threshold, the girl turns around and casually says that she never found out the magician's name, but her sister should probably know it. The young people simultaneously say that the princess can call the magician Hughes. Abella waves her hand and says that she will no longer interfere with the young people and leaves. The magician looks at the frightened Lemuria and says that they are trapped. The princess, with a joyful smile and a mysterious look, decisively leaves Hughes's shop. Looking at the girl's satisfied face, Victor notices that she was obviously able to find out something. Abella smiles happily and says that it's time for them to go home and they'll talk later. In the palace, a girl notices in a great mood that Heidi makes the best tea. Victor is wary of the princess's behavior and asks if it's time to tell him everything. The girl gives Delphi to the maid and asks her to take him to Neil, because the cat clearly could use some training. As soon as the door closes behind Heidi, all the feigned joy disappears from Abella's face. The girl thoughtfully says that the full name of the Holy Knight is Pagolite Hughes Levictor. Victor assures that this could be just a coincidence. You never know how many people in the world have similar names. The princess drinks tea, agrees with the young man, but says that there is more to it than that. Lemuria's pendant was given to her by Pagolite before the exam, and now her sister has admitted that she received it from Hughes. The girl wonders whether two different people could have given the same pendants to her sister, or, the princess assures, it was the same person who did it. This is the only way in which the princess's dear sister could forget about their differences. Abella recalls that in Roma, the non-protagonist Pagolite used the pseudonym Hughes. Victor thoughtfully says that then Her Highness Lemuria knew about everything from the very beginning. Abella angrily says that if their assumptions are correct, then during the exam, the sister was directly involved in everything. Victor thoughtfully says that if the magician managed to hide the truth so carefully, then how did he manage to compromise himself so easily? Suddenly, there is a knock on the door, and the bodyguard walks towards the entrance. Heidi comes in and says that Her Highness Lemuria is inviting Princess Abella to a tea party tomorrow. The young people look at each other in fear, not understanding what this could mean. Blair happily says that she never thought about inviting the Princess of Lemuria to the tea party. The eldest princess shyly says that it is a great honor for her to host her friends from the academy. Blair and Lady Alice, according to etiquette, they say that it is a great honor for them to be here. Suddenly, Princess Abella appears behind Lemuria and asks for forgiveness for her lateness. The girl sits down at the table and says that she was carried away by gifts for girls and completely forgot about time. The princess calls Victor, who is holding a tray with gift boxes in his hands. The young man distributes gifts to the girls, and Abella expresses hope that she was able to please them. Suddenly, Lady Alice says that in their empire, there is a wonderful astrological shop, and asks the girls if they have been there. Lemuria calmly replies that if her friend talks about the divine house, then she knows about it. Blair says she has heard a lot about this house, but has never been there. Suddenly, Alice says in a whisper that if rumors are to be believed, then the owner of this house is a real handsome man. Expecting anything but this, Abella chokes on her tea and begins to cough. Lemuria laughs and says that if girls want to know how handsome a magician is, then they only need to look at Pagolite. Seeing the bewilderment on the faces of her friends, the eldest princess says that Pagolite is the owner of the divine house. Abella looks at her sister with concern. Apparently, she decided to reveal all her cards and no longer hide the truth. The princess doesn't understand that Lemuria just told the truth, or realize that her sister guessed everything. The girl wonders whether her sister and the magician are in cahoots, or whether they simply have a mutually beneficial relationship. The sisters smile sweetly at each other, maintaining the appearance of a wonderful relationship. Returning to her quarters, Abella stretches and admits that she is very tired. Heidi laughs and notes that Her Highness has just returned from a tea party where she was supposed to rest. The girl lies down on the couch and thinks that when a person from being honest and kind suddenly turns into a traitor, it is stupefying. In the novel, Lemuria was an honest, polite girl who immediately endeared herself to people. Abella wonders if good-heartedness can be tritely imitated. Lemuria was found shortly after it was discovered that the youngest princess did not have magical powers. Remembering past events, it becomes clear to the princess that Duke Vieto has known her for a long time. Now, it is quite obvious that Lemuria and Pagolite have too complicated a relationship. The Prince Pagolite knocks on the door of the princess's chambers and says that he needs to speak with Her Highness. Heidi opens the door and says that Her Highness is ready to receive Sir Pagolite. After waiting for the maid to leave the room, Abella asks what she owes such an unexpected visit. The Holy Knight says that Her Highness is probably already aware of the special final testing of the Academy. Abella doesn't quite understand what this is about. The knight explains that the test is used to test the future heirs of the empire. The young man declares that the princess has passed the test, and now the church will certainly support her as the heir to the throne. The girl was sure that the church and the imperial family did not interfere in each other's internal affairs. Not knowing what to say, Abella asks if she can do something for the church in this case. Pagolite states that she just needs to wait and be ready to protect the church when the time comes. The princess smiles sweetly, but she herself thinks that the church wants to make a puppet out of her. Suddenly, the knight says that if the girl wants to remove her seal, then he knows how to do it. Abella looks at the knight in amazement and does not understand how much else he knows. Pagolite confidently says that with their help, Her Majesty will become much stronger. The girl says that she needs to think about the Holy Knight's proposal. The princess thinks about everything she has heard and clearly understands that something is wrong here. Abella suddenly declares that it was not her plan to become empress. The girl continues that the church's intentions are pure and she accepts them, but this is too serious a step and she needs time to think. The knight stands up and says that he understands the princess perfectly and is ready to wait as long as necessary. As he leaves, Pagolite says that he is always at Her Majesty's disposal. Abella exhales with relief and thinks that it seems that, in the novel, the throne went to Lemuria for a reason. Victor walks along a dark gallery, lost in his thoughts, but suddenly hears a rustling. Her Highness Lemuria comes out from behind the column and asks the young man if they can talk. The next day, early in the morning, the young man stands on the same gallery and watches a dove approaching him. Having removed the message from the bird's paw, Victor plunges into reading. The young man burns a piece of paper and thinks that it is time to return. Suddenly, just like on the eve, Lemuria appears from behind the column. The girl notices that Victor is too serious and asks about what happened to him. The young man gloomily replies that he has personal problems. The princess has nothing to worry about. Lemuria thoughtfully says that as far as she knows, Victor is not only Abella's bodyguard. Among other things, the young man is the third prince of the kingdom of Serenia. The girl, with apparent alarm, reports that the boy's father is sick and he should return home. Victor is confused by the unexpected conversation and asks what the princess is hinting at. Lemuria twirls her hair on her finger and notices that her sister does not have magic, and the guy cannot always be around and fulfill his duty as a bodyguard. Suddenly, Abella walks along the gallery and thinks that Victor is being delayed for some reason. Suddenly, the princess sees that the young man is standing with Lemuria and talking to her about something. The girl approaches the young people and directly asks what they are discussing. Lemuria says that since her sister came, she will no longer disturb them. As she leaves, the eldest princess turns around and tells Victor that she will wait for his answer. Abella looks at the young man in amazement, and he replies that he needs time to think. The girl desperately does not understand what is happening, and the only thought that comes to her mind is that her sister confessed her love to Victor. The princess replays what happened in her head and nervously taps fractions on the table with her fingers. Half an hour later, Heidi begs the girl to stop knocking, otherwise she will simply break the table. Abella clutches her head in despair and thinks about what question Victor should answer. Heidi gently says that if the girl is so concerned about this issue, then she can directly ask Sir Victor about it. The princess stands up abruptly and orders her maid to help her try on a dress for the spring ball. Every year, the empire holds a ball to which it invites all unmarried men and women. Abella irritably thinks that the spring ball is essentially a fair for brides and grooms. The princess notices that this year, a lot of men from other countries came to the ball. The girl is surprised to see that even Prince Vilna came to the ball. Through the crowd, His Majesty the Emperor approaches his daughters. Alvar approaches Abella and asks if anyone has already attracted the princess's attention. The father says that if the girls like someone, they can invite him to the first dance. Suddenly, the princess realizes that in fact, this year the ball is organized especially for her and her sister. The self-confident young Carmelite, the son of the Duke, stands aside, surrounded by friends and looking at the princesses. One of the friends asks with interest which of the two princesses Mr. Carmelite likes. The young man thoughtfully says that Princess Lymeria is gentle and virtuous. They say that the girl is ideal and has already settled in a huge number of hearts of young aristocrats. The gentleman shakes his head and declares that, unfortunately, the princess was brought from the slums, and this does not suit him. Abella is a princess of the empire in her own right, very intelligent but capricious and with a bad reputation. Suddenly, the young people notice Lymeria walking towards them and decide that she will ask the gentleman to the first dance. But he has not yet made a decision. The Carmelite bows respectfully and greets Her Highness, but she, without paying any attention to him, silently passes by. The girl curtsies and asks if she may have the honor of inviting Sir Victor to the first dance. Victor bows to Lymeria's greeting and says that it would be a great honor for him. At the same time, Pago Light approaches Abella and invites the girl to her first dance. She politely agrees. Carmelite watches what is happening in horror, not understanding what is happening here. Music plays and two pairs of young people begin to dance. Noticing that Abella is constantly looking the other way, Pago Light notes that in fact, the girl would prefer to dance with Sir Victor. The princess replies that she was sure that Lymeria would dance with Pagolite and thinks that this was the case in the novel. The girl looks longingly at her sister's couple and realizes that, most likely, her guesses were correct. The dance ends. The young people thank each other and get ready to leave. Suddenly, a rumble is heard in the crowd. People start shouting that someone is injured. The crowd parts a little. Mr. Carmelite lies on the floor, held by a friend. Blood is visible on his clothes. Someone starts shouting that the young man killed himself. One of those present states that he saw young Mr. Carmelite holding a knife and beating himself. Noticing the bustle, the emperor comes out into the center of the hall and asks what happened. Abella looks at the young man's body in horror, when suddenly a cry is heard above the hall that the curse is to blame. Prince Vilna points his finger at Victor and shouts that black hair is a symbol of a curse. Abella realizes that the prince has started his favorite topic and annoyedly tells him not to talk nonsense. The emperor orders the knights to check everything and clear the place. After some time, the knight reports to the emperor that he found traces of dark magic on Mr. Carmelite. The emperor listens that most likely there was an infiltration of dark magic, which led to suicide. Lymeria presses her hands to her chest in horror, and Pagolite declares that everything needs to be sorted out in order to prevent this from happening again. Abella looks at Victor with concern and wonders if this could all be just a coincidence. Of all those present, only the young man knows black magic, but he danced with Lymeria all this time. The girl, light and darkness are very sensitive to each other and always unmistakably determine one or another presence. Panic begins among people. People are afraid of black magic and decide that they need to run away as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the emperor's thunderous voice echoes across the hall, ordering everyone to stand. Alvar resolutely declares that until the murderer is found, no one will leave the castle. Vilno shouts that among those present, only one person is associated with dark magic, and it was he who drove Camelot to suicide. Abella decisively comes forward and says that if Sir Victor had used dark magic for such purposes, she herself would have committed suicide a few years ago.